The next show will start in 1 minute.
Videos are currently restricted.
When we first realized that our videos were being restricted, there were about 15 videos that were restricted, and that was a year and a half ago. And since then, not only has the issue not been resolved, there's actually been 20 more videos restricted. And currently, it's closer to 40 videos that are being restricted.
On December 18th last year, Twitter permanently suspended my account and the account run by my organization, American Renaissance.
A campaign ad banned by Twitter. Representative Marsha Blackburn talking abortion and her pro-life views that Twitter deemed inflammatory.
Yesterday, Alex Jones became an unperson, straight out of the plot of George Orwell's 1984, where when someone broke the rules of the power structure, they would have all evidence of their previous existence completely deleted. Which is what happened yesterday when YouTube, Facebook, and iTunes completely wiped all the videos, posts, and podcasts from Alex Jones and InfoWars. And regardless what you think of him or InfoWars content, this is the digital equivalent of book burning and sets a horrifying precedent for mass censorship by the big tech companies.
Streaming live from the Paul and Catherine Ranke Memorial Studio, this is TV Free Baltimore. Support for TV Free Baltimore comes from viewers like you. Become a TV Free Baltimore member by visiting patreon.com/TVFreeBaltimore.
As a public service, TV Free Baltimore provides a digital soapbox for those the mainstream media ignores. The opinions expressed in this live stream are not necessarily those of the owners, management, or underwriters of TV Free Baltimore. Furthermore, TV Free Baltimore streams hyper-local content focusing on politics and entertainment in the Baltimore viewing area.
We hope you're enjoying your visit here this evening. Now, on with the show.
Hello, this is Paul Stefan, and we're here today in Carroll County, Maryland, at the home of filmmaker Wayne Shipley. And Wayne was over 30 years an educator in the Anne Arundel County school system. Many of those years as a chair of the English department at Atholton High School and North County High School. And
Andover High School.
Andover High School. That's right, it was that one. Thank you for that correction. And then when he, I guess, retired, he decided to go into films, and he has had two previous feature films, One-Eyed Horse and The Day of the Gun. And today we want to talk about his latest feature, Bill Tilghman and the Outlaws.
Some folks from California,
They want to put me on the screen. This Hollywood fella wants Bat Bear and me to make a picture show about outlaws. The thing is they want us, not play actors. Us. And so they want to use real outlaws too.
Sounds like a good way to get yourself shot.
This bull goose named Selly, he said the people back east are clamoring for the real thing, not make-believe. And he knows Tom Osborne at the territorial prison.
Gentlemen, Marshal Tilghman and these Hollywood flickermen are here for a reason. And it's not because they want to look at your pretty faces. No, they want to put 8 of you fine aristocrats in a moving picture. You'll be 10 feet tall on the big screen and live forever.
He said we could get out a few prominent hard cases, have them rob the bank. There'll be this big shootout, and we'll lock them up. Cole?
Tilghman. Looking old.
Beats not looking old, I guess. The dime novels are everywhere making outlaws into heroes. Scoundrels, murderers, and thieves is all they are, but to the folks back east, they're heroes.
Idle threats don't become a man of your stature.
You're right. What's the point of idle threats? This could be an opportunity to show them what it used to be like.
Well, all seems to be going well with our wild bunch. You know, if we had a few more of our desperados, we would have had our dirty dozen.
If you add any more, I quit. And just call them outlaws, because that's all they are. Nothing more, and sure as certain, nothing less.
What if we rob the bank for real?
Why?
To humiliate the great Bill Tilghman. Listen, I got a really bad feeling about this. There's 100 people. All it takes is one of them to upset the cart. Besides, I got a lot more to lose than the both of you.
Make the West live for us all. Oh, Jim! They're robbing the bank!
To the town. What are they doing? They're robbing the bank! Yeah.
Oh, wow. Now, where did the idea come from you to do this film?
Well, I'd finished, I got distribution on the last film, Day of the Gun, in 2014, I think it was. And we were making a lot of short films for our series called Tales of the Wild West, which is up on Amazon Prime. My friend, Dan Searles, came to me and he says, he presents me with a 60-page script. He said, "Oh, gee, I would love to do this. It's called Bill Tilghman and the Outlaws, or it's about Bill Tilghman. And it's based a little bit on fact." So Dan showed up with a script. We said, okay, let's go. If we can find the money, let's do it. And then my assistant director and chief operating officer and brains of the outfit, Jill Ryan Gray, and I sat down for the better part of 14 months, meeting one day a week to flesh out the script and to make it into a shooting script. Dan had shown up with the characters and with some dialogue and things like this, and what we ended up having to do, of course, is to format it and turn it into a script, and it took us 14 months to do that. But I think the end result was something that we were all fairly happy with. I'm hoping Dan was happy with it anyway.
Again, so with the for people who want to see this film, tell us about the story.
The storyline is based a little bit on fact. The fact is that Bill Tilghman, who was really a very respected lawman in his day. None of the lawmen were perfect. All of them were suspect on all sorts of things. But Bat Masterson said about Bill Tilghman that he was the best, he was the finest of us all. So what happened was that Tilghman actually gave up being a city marshal, or a U.S. marshal, in fact, and wanted to make a film that celebrated the law side of things and not the bad guys. His feeling was that the bad guys, the desperados, were getting all of the glory back east in the dime novels and things like that. So he felt that, gee, I can make this happen, and so he did in fact make a film. And he was, again, his motive was to make sure that the people back east understood that these guys, these desperados, were in fact often, if not evil, then certainly they broke the law. They're not to be celebrated. That was his motivation for that. So what we do with this, and what Dan Searles, the writer, wanted to do, was to have, instead of Tilghman coming up with the idea, we wanted Tilghman to kind of be the alpha male hero who was reluctant to get too much exposure, Into town come 4 movie people. Okay. One is a guy named Selig, played by Robert Neal Marshall in the film, does a wonderful job with that role. And his idea was, people back east, this is 1915 now, so movies have been, since 1903, 1904, movies have become a little bit more seriously considered as a money-making, serious money-making deal. D.W. Griffith was just getting started. So they come to town and say, hey, Bill Tilghman, you're still marshal, and what we would love to do is have you and Bat Masterson and your deputy Bear and all the lawmen that you have an acquaintance with in this town. We would like to use you in the film, so we'd be featuring the real people and not actors. And what we want to do is to bring in some of the real bad men, many of whom you have arrested and sent to prison. So that way they'll get a chance to see the real bad men and the real lawmen, and we'll stage a bank robbery, and we'll have a big shootout in the street, and you will end up arresting these guys. And what the people back east will do in our marketing campaign is flock to the theaters to see the real deal and not actors. So that's basically the storyline. It's a clash of cultures, basically. And what happens in with this clash of cultures is that you had this little sleepy Oklahoma town that was still living in the 19th century. You still have, and into this environment, you interject the crazy movie people. And one of the crazy movie people is Brian St. August's character, Gulman, who is the director. He's a German director, and it was very popular to bring European directors over because they're the ones who understood how to do these things, you know. So he's as nutty as a jaybird, but he is a certified European director, you know. And then we bring in the daughter of Selig, and we bring in the production manager, played by Marge Bowers in this film, where she is the one who calls all the shots. Even though she is behind the camera and she's a woman, she still calls all of the shots. She is the organizing aspect of it. So into this sleepy little town, you bring the crazy, crazy Hollywood land people. Add to that 8 desperados. Cole Younger, Frank James, These people, Frank James is actually didn't spend much time in jail, and he actually has a haberdashery shop in the town, and he gets talked into being a part of it too. Everybody wants wants their moment on the screen here. So into that situation, of course, we have now a third element. So we have potential for chaos here. Tilghman understands this. Tilghman says on more than one occasion, "Geez, I wish I hadn't, agreed to do this." Even though he gets a big paycheck, and his wife Zoe, played by Kathy Sherrill, was just an unbelievable amount of money, more money than you made in 5 years here. You get to do for 2 weeks' work or whatever. So things get really hairy when the Outlaws, predominantly the outlaw Cole Younger, played by Darby Hinton in the film of Daniel Boone series. He played Little Israel in Daniel Boone, and he's continued to work all this time. Now, Darby is perfect age to play Cole Younger. And he says, geez, he said, we were, at one time in our lives, we were just unbelievably respected, or we were, people were writing books about us. And now, what are we doing? I mean, we're in prison, and we have one chance to redeem ourselves. So let's rob the bank for real. And hence the conflict begins, the chaos begins. So that's the story of Bill Tilghman in the Outlaws.
I think that's already going to grab people to see that when it comes out. Now, Dan Searle's script, was that an adaptation or was it an original?
It was an original. Dan, like me, is nuts, and he loves. We worked before on a couple of short films, and he's very much a student of the West, the old West. In fact, we did a short in which we brought in several of his really solid ideas. And again, they're up on Amazon Prime under Tales of the Wild West.
Right. I was going to say that, the movie works in so many different levels, and that it's Western, it's historical, and it's about a movie. Right. It's about movie making, which I obviously enjoy. But if you hang around movie people very long, you understand that everybody's nuts. And what happens with movies is that they're collaborative endeavors. No single person is able to do everything that's necessary. If you need somebody to fall off a building, the director doesn't do that, and the actors don't do that. You need a stunt person to do that. So I've always enjoyed that aspect of movie making. It is a collaborative of effort. In this case, we had well over 100 people involved making the film. Large cast.
Yeah, it was a large cast.
Now, the Tilghman movie, which is only a fragment, did you use that as a jumping off point in any place for your film, or match any shots from the original film?
We did not, only because I watched what was available at the time, which was 5 or 6, 8 minutes or whatever I watched it, and it didn't inspire me to go ahead and try to emulate anything like that. Number one, not many people even know it exists. The piece of the original film exists. Basically, Tilghman's role here is different in his movie. He was the director of the movie, and he did bring in some noted people. In fact, he had an ex-convict helping him on the film, from what I've read. I don't know any of this. Bill was born a few years before I was born, and so not many, but a few. So at any rate, it was curious to look at it, and mainly what you see is somebody who knows nothing about filmmaking making a film. Right. And anybody who works in film understands that there's a language that film has that you don't get with the written word.
And now there was another movie about Bill Tilghman with Sam Elliott called You Know My Name.
You Know My Name. Mm-hmm.
Does this film have any crossover with
I watched that. I had not seen that film. When Dan came up with the idea, I had not seen that film, and when I was looking, I found it. It didn't do well commercially, but anything that Sam Elliott's in, I'll certainly watch. And it basically dealt with the demise of Bill Tilghman. And again, we're set in 1915. Tilghman was shot in the line of duty at age 70 in 1924, I think, or basically 10 years after our film was set. He was 70 years old, and he was shot by a prohibition officer, somebody on his side, essentially. He was, so I did watch that, and it was a much darker film than this film. We try to keep this film fairly light, certainly family friendly. We do have one story arc in the film, however, that's pretty heavy duty, and that's with the character of Murphy, who's played by Richard Cutting, who's one of my stock actors. I wouldn't do a film unless Richard is in the film. Yeah.
Well, one of the things, too, I thought was interesting for your film, we talk about local independent films, that you had a preponderance of people who have been Hollywood actors and actresses in this film. You don't usually see that many in an indie or a local indie like this. You know, usually you get just local actors put the films together, and sometimes it gets one person who has some Hollywood experience, so that when they try to sell the movie or do a distribution, well, he or she just happens to be in this movie. But it's different. How did you get so many of these gifted actors and actresses in your film?
I'm not sure. With the last film, Day of the Gun, we brought in Eric Roberts, and I loved working with Eric Roberts for 3 days. What a pro, and great fun, just great fun to have him on the set. With this film, that was the first question that Dan and I were talking about. Now Dan he said, oh, we've got to get some of these guys who are still around, who were a part of the Western genre, because let's face it, we have a marketing dilemma. I live in Maryland, working in West Virginia, making something that's probably going to be popular west of the Mississippi more so than it is here, although we never can tell about those kinds of things. So we knew that we had to find at least some people. So we did get in touch with Darby Hinton. Dan and I went to a convention and talked with Darby, because he was young enough to play again, another alpha male role. And I met with him, and I made it, we made an offer and just loved working with this guy. So we started out with Darby. Before that, I'd already in my mind cast Ken Arnold as Bill Tilghman. I saw Ken Arnold in his film The Night Watchman. I was at an invited screening, and something drew me to Ken and saying, oh, there's my Bill Tilghman. And so he actually was the first person that I cast, and because he has the physicality to do this. We had talked with Ron Ely. I don't know whether you remember Ron Ely from the Tarzan, the television Tarzan. Talked with him several times, and I wanted him to be in the film because I love the Tarzan series and the old Tarzan movies and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, Ron said, "Well, gee, I would like to play Tilghman," and Ron is in wonderful shape, great guy. But I felt that he was probably just, for some of the physical stuff, just a little bit too. Even though he's quite athletic, obviously in his day, but he's 80 years old at this particular point. So I couldn't do that. So anyway, I cast Ken. Got Darby on board, and then Darby started, and he saw the script, and he became virtually one of the producers involved, because he then made contact with several other people. We picked up Lana Wood, for instance, Natalie Wood's sister, a former Bond girl from Diamonds Are Forever. Great scene with Sean Connery in it. I needed somebody to play Ma Darling, and this is as far away from a Bond girl as you could possibly get. But I talked with her. Darby mentioned it to her. He made the initial contact. Oh, sure, love to do it, she said. Fantastic. And then we ended up with Johnny Crawford from the Riflemen. Now we had spoken with Johnny at a convention as well, and talked with his wife on the phone and said, "Gee, are you guys willing to come out to do this? And we'll shoot you first. We'll shoot your scenes because you have basically a cameo. You're playing William S. Hart." And we've got, my wife, Pat, will build a costume for you that's identical to one of William S. Hart's costumes. And we'll find a paint horse for you to ride because Johnny, William S. Hart rode a paint all the time. His horse was named Fritz, if I remember. So Johnny really wanted to do it, and so we got him involved. And we shot his scenes several months before we did principal photography. I wanted to get his scenes done. And we had extras there that day, and it was just a lot of fun. And what a delightful guy.
And what I've seen, some of the stills, he actually has some physical resemblance to William S. Hart.
He does. If you want to, he when we were finished with him, when Pat was finished making the costume and everything, and we had trouble getting the hat. He wore a hat that was unusual. It was almost military, but not quite. It had the 4 mule kicks in it and the whole bit. But I went to a shop that I often deal with, and they swore they could find a hat like this, and they did find 2 hats like that, in fact, which we gave the entire costume to Johnny, who wore it for Halloween.
Wow.
His wife Charlotte told me that he wore this costume, for Halloween, and he has since worn it apparently several times doing conventions and things like this.
Now, there's going to be some screenings or premiere in the area in a few months?
We're going to have an invited screening. I don't know whether this fits in your timetable here or not, but we have an invited screening for anybody connected with the film on February 9th, 2019 at the AFI Silver Theater in Silver Spring,
beautiful
Maryland. It's beautiful.
The main theater is beautiful deco.
Oh, I just sat there. I mean, I went in there. We had a meeting last month, and to work out the details. And I just fell in love with the theater. 400 seats, not a bad seat in the house. And it, again, the whole deco. It was like going back into the 40s. It was wonderful.
The thing to say too with it, I mean. Besides that, are you going to do the festival circuit, or?
I don't know yet at this particular point. I've only done 1 or 2 festivals in my whole life. I don't know how valuable they are or anything like that. And everybody says you should do it. I'm going to kind of back out of the marketing aspect of the film, and I tell everybody, well, I only own 15% of it. So you guys are the ones who need to do it.
That's out of your hands. The marketing, the distribution,
right? Yeah,
the publicity, and
all that. We've been talking. People have called us about the film, and they're very interested. They say in doing it, but we're going to be very, very careful this time. And again, we formed an LLC to do that. We did everything the right way. We got SAG actors. We did everything the right way, and it was tedious at times and painful at times. But ultimately, I'm hoping it pays off. And one of our executive producers, also the writer Dan Searles, and his wife Edie are going to handle a lot of the marketing end of it because
with all the talent you have, it has potential even almost for release.
Well, it could. We will have it. We will definitely show it in, like we did with Day of the Gun. We will have a DCP made, which is a digital cinema package, it's called. Basically, it's a proprietary hard drive is what it is for the theaters. And so our goal is to take it, we're definitely going to show it in Berkeley Springs because they have the Star Theater there, and we've shown The Day of the Gun twice there. We're going to go to Delaware. We're going to go to some of the Alamo theaters. Anyone who, there's a theater in like Ferndale, Pasadena area that I know the guy who operates those theaters, so he always works out a deal with me. And what I really like doing is bringing in. I don't want to be the talking head, even though I seem as if I would for doing this interview. But I like to have people host the interviews. And for instance, I'll get Brian St. August to host one. One of the screenings, and he'll come in and he'll talk about his character a little bit or whatever. We'll probably take it to Texas because one of our actors, Jason Brown, who usually plays the young love interest in the film, really good-looking, wonderful guy. He didn't want to do that this time. He had grown this beard that made him look like Man Mountain Dean or something like this. And so I said, all right, you can be one of the bad guys in it this time. So he does a wonderful job. Anything he ever does is done wonderfully. And so he does a fantastic job as one of the bad guys in it, and he is involved in the big shootout sequence. He's from Texas, and his family still lives in Texas. So we arranged for a screening where he went down and hosted it for the Alamo screening, and his mom was there, and his dad was there, and the whole family was there. So that kind of thing it's half the fun of doing something like this. I really like that element of being able to, or that aspect of being able to offer screenings on big screens. Any
thoughts of the next project? What's next?
Oh, geez, it's a good thing my wife's not here.
Are you already got a project you're thinking of?
No, well, we have a couple of. We're going to do some shorts. For the Tales of the Wild West episode. A series.
No features on the horizon, right?
No features at this particular point. In fact, what's happening now is that episodic stuff seems to be what is marketable today. You can move, and right now what we're doing again is the Tales of the Wild West. We'll continue to do those. We can shoot those in a day or two and edit them in 20 minutes, and they're 20 minutes long. We can edit them in a day or two and put them up. And Amazon Prime, even though it's only paying 6 cents an hour.
Wow.
6 cents an hour. But what we end up with is something that some people continue to watch. We took Day of the Gun and turned it into a miniseries, 6 episodes, and it's still drawing about 15,000 minutes a day.
Very good.
I don't know who's watching it. Of course, if you divide that by 60 and then multiply it by 6 cents,
not a lot.
Not a lot of money, but at least there's some return. And the fact that it seems to be holding fairly steady. It seems to have some legs. So I don't know why. I don't know why it's long, but it worked because it started out at something that was longer than it should have been. It works well as a miniseries because with 6 episodes or 6 elements or 6 episodes or whatever you want to call them, it works. It works.
Online, how can people find you and find the movie?
Amazon Prime. If you go to Tales of the Wild West, you'll find we have 9. I think 9 episodes from Tales of the Wild West up right now. And they go back to things that we had done for years. We actually took, again, the way Republic Studios used to do things, we actually took pieces of other films and turned them into their own film. and in other cases we shot brand new episodes.
Of course, you have a website for Bill Tilghman, don't you?
Right, we have a website for Bill Tilghman, and we have our One-Eyed Horse website, which is the main website for what we do. We have One-Eyed Horse Productions. My first feature was titled One-Eyed Horse. I own a one-eyed horse, and he's getting up there now because he was in the first feature, so he's in his mid-20s now.
It's up there for a horse.
But and he's had one eye since only one seeing eye since almost since we've owned him, almost since.
All right. Well, we want to thank you for having us here today, and we want everybody to see that movie when it comes out. We want to be at the premiere and talk to your actors and get some more footage.
Let's see if we can make that happen. And again, I celebrate what you guys are doing because it's so important, because there are lots of wonderful filmmakers out there. I just watched Eric Christopher Meyer's Butterfly Kisses, and I told Eric, I said, look, I make cowboy movies, but you know what, I liked this film, and I'm not necessarily a found footage or slasher fan or anything like this, but this was a layered film.
Yes.
And I think that I want to see these younger filmmakers get an opportunity. I mean, I'm out here playing. These guys are probably a little more serious than I am. But
we've interviewed Eric. He's a great guy.
Oh, he is. I just enjoy. I enjoy what he did, and he just sent back ha ha. When I tell him, look, this is coming from a guy who makes cowboy movies.
Right. Terrific. Well, again, thanks for having us, and so that's it for today. We're here with filmmaker Wayne Shipley talking about Bill Tilghman and the Outlaws. Hopefully sometime next year it'll be somewhere near you. So until then, this is Paul Stefan saying bye-bye.
We hope you're enjoying your visit here this evening. Now, on with the show.
Hey, Penn Jillette here. Being a libertarian means being skeptical of power. Skeptical there's one way to do things. Is there going to be one way of living that's going to make you, Justin Bieber, Pat Robertson, Marilyn Manson, Hillary Clinton, me, and your Aunt Olga all equally happy? It all comes down to this. Maybe I know the best way to live my life, but wow, I sure don't know the best way to live yours. So why not err on the side of more freedom, respect for what makes us different? If you think a little bit like I do and want to learn more, go to libertarianism.org. We've got podcasts and videos, original source material, and essays all about the idea of using a little more liberty. Libertarianism.org. Be just like me.
Good morning. I see you've already met my colleague, Mike Lee. He's a good guy, and we do a lot of things together and work on a lot of projects together. You might be scratching your head and asking yourself, what is a libertarian doing talking to a bunch of evangelical students? Aren't libertarians crazy? Aren't they kind of scary? And I think it's a misconception sometimes, because when you hear the word libertarian, you think, well, gosh, libertarians, they want anything goes, right? No rules, no laws, you can do whatever you want. And it's not exactly what we advocate. Libertarians do advocate freedom, liberty. We advocate government ought to leave you alone and that you ought to get to make choices on your own. But would that mean lawlessness? Would that mean no rules, anything goes? Well, even libertarians believe in some sort of rules. And so one of the rules that libertarians believe in is something called the non-aggression principle. And this is a principle really that when you hear it, you'll say, well, gosh, most government is founded upon this. The non-aggression principle means that under a libertarian society, if we had one, you pretty much could do whatever you wanted as long as you didn't hurt somebody else. So as long as you didn't invade their sphere of their rights, you could kind of do what you wanted. And you say, well, gosh, then there still would be all kinds of crazy things. Everybody would be doing heroin, there'd be prostitution, there'd be all these things. And really, many of us who are Christian and libertarian believe that not only would you be restrained by government from doing things that would harm somebody else, but that a libertarian society, or even a republic, as we were intended to be, would have some kind of restraint. And some people have described it as virtue. Washington described the beginning of the republic, and he said it would be necessary for our country to succeed to have virtue. So you'd have the idea that the government would restrain you from harming other individuals, but there has to be something that also guides us, that keeps us on the straight and narrow, allows us to cooperate as a civilized society, allows us to be an advanced society. Think of it this way. There are laws against stealing, and there should be, but how many in here would steal if there were not a law against stealing? Oh, good. I'm glad we don't have any thieves here today. But the thing is most of us don't steal. Most of us don't rape, murder, do all these horrific things, not because there's a law against it, but because we have a sense of right and wrong. We have a moral compass. We have something grounded in religion. We have this sense of virtue. And you think, well, how many people have this? And that's sort of the question of where a society goes over a long period of time. Some would argue that we had more virtue 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. That may or may not be true, but there's at least some argument to that. Some who look at Europe say that they've abandoned religion and they've become much more secular, and they've sort of lost their sense of right and wrongs in some ways. So really you have to have both. You have to have a government that restrains you from harming someone, but you also want to have a people that is a virtuous people. There's a theologian by the name of Os Guinness, and he puts it this way. He says that liberty requires restraint, but the only restraint consistent with liberty is self-restraint. And so the reason why that's important is we often see, particularly from Christians, they come to Washington and they say, we've got all these terrible, immoral things happening, government has to fix them. When in reality, it may be that there are some things that do need fixing that perhaps we can't fix. And I'll give you an example. The number one correlation, causation, whatever you want to have it, with poverty in our country. If we say we want to wipe out poverty, what's the number one thing that is linked to poverty in our country? It's having children before you're married. Now, I'm not here to moralize or tell you, what's right or wrong. I'm just here to tell you that is the number one link. If you look at charts, there's a book by Charles Murray called Coming Apart at the Seams, and he does 2 categories of charts on everything, all the socioeconomic, all the income, everything about your life, and there are 2 tracks. One, people who don't finish high school and have children before they're married, and they're here along the bottom of the x-axis. And then you see at the very top of our society, the top elite, and these aren't all true, but they're mostly true, it's generalizations, people who finish college and wait to have kids. But then you say, well, what's government going to do about this? I can't make you wait. So really, sometimes when I agree with a group of ministers, they say, what are you going to do to make us a better, more moral nation? I say, well, what are you going to do? And really, there has to be some of that. And I think there has to be this realization the government can't do everything for you. You have to be part of it. And it doesn't mean it's not important. It doesn't mean that virtue is not important. It doesn't mean that we don't want virtuous people in government. But it means that government's not going to make us a virtuous society. And I think that's very important when we think about what we want from government and where we're going. A second way of looking at this would be on the idea of rights. So the right to be left alone, the right to practice your religion, the right to have property, the right to have speech, all of these rights that are sort of in the Bill of Rights. Did the government grant you these rights, or did they pre-exist government and the government guarantees these rights? And it's very important when we look at rights because many of us who see the Founding Fathers and talk about the idea of natural rights or God-given rights, we think they're innately yours. The right to speak, to practice your religion, to keep the fruits of your earning, these are yours. They're just inherently yours. Now you say, well, we have to give up something to be in a society, right? Well, there are certain things, like for example, your property. As you go out and you earn your check and you get your check and you've worked 2 weeks, a portion of it's taken by the government. You say, well, aren't they taking my stuff? Well, they are, and we have this idea, maybe not explicit, but we have this idea of a social compact. So you say, we're going to live in a civilized world and part of my check's going to be taken. And so we kind of implicitly agree to this, but if at the end of 2 weeks you were to make $600 and you got your check and it said minus $600 and your net was 0, how many people would like living in that society? then 100% of the fruits of your labor would belong to government, would be taken from you. So the question always is, when we look at issues like this, whose money is it? Well, I think it's yours. Are you willing to give up some of it? Yes, but I want to minimize how much I give up it because I want to maximize my freedom and my ability to either give it to my church, help the people in my community, or help my family. And so really it's always a question of maximum or minimum. How much government do you want? You want the least amount of government that we need, because the more government you have, or the more of your paycheck you give up, the less of your freedom you have. And so this is the tug of war, but I think it's an interesting way of looking at it when you try to decide, do you want more government or less government? Do you want government to do X or Y? Is government good at doing things? You ask yourself, if you have $100, if each of you had $100 and you were going to give it to somebody, if you thought, I really want to help people, would you give it to the federal welfare system, or would you give it to the Salvation Army? I wouldn't hesitate for a second. There's no way I would send $1 up here that I didn't have to, because they're just not very good at it. They're so far away from the people that can't do it, but I can see in my community what the Salvation Army does. I can go to the homeless shelter. I can go to Helping Hands in Christ and see how they help people pay their bills. Now you say, well, government does do some good for people. They probably do, but they're horribly inefficient at it. And so you say, well, we need government to take care of people. It's like, these are the people that can't run the post office. All right? They have a monopoly on delivering letters and they lose $1 billion a quarter. They're just not very good at it. So government is best that governs least, so you have the most amount of freedom, but government is also best that governs at a more local level. Doesn't make it perfect, but you can at least see it. Your city councilman or city councilwoman lives down the street. You can talk to her about, or him about, an idea about how you might have better sidewalks or how we might do something for the homeless in our community. But if you send it up here, we will throw lots of money at it and it won't be any better. Department of Education, we didn't have it when I was a kid. We have it now, and our scores are maybe not any better than they were before we had the Department of Education. You say, well, should government be involved in education? Well, there wasn't any provision for it in the Constitution. You say, well, no government? What would happen? What would happen if the Department of Education disappeared tomorrow? What would happen to us? Probably nothing. The thing is most of your taxes that support your schools are from local taxes. In Kentucky, 95% of our taxes are from Kentucky taxes. And we have a Department of Education there, but we duplicate everything. So the Department of Education has had all these teaching standards and testing standards, and then Kentucky does the same thing, and they're spending millions of dollars doing the same thing the Department of Education is doing. We take all these tests, and the teachers are forced to teach to the test, and then in the end, we're not really positive whether anybody's any smarter other than they can take these tests. And there still are those who argue that we're not doing better. One of the things I think we could do in education is allow more freedom.
This is a little treatise on basic economics called The Modern Little Red Hen. Once upon a time, there was a little red hen who scratched about the barnyard until she uncovered some grains of wheat. She called her neighbors and said, "If we plant this wheat, we shall have bread to eat. Who will help me plant it?" "Not I," said the cow. "Not I," said the duck. "Not I," said the pig. "Not I," said the goose. "Then I will," said the little red hen, and she did. The wheat grew tall and ripened into golden grain. "Who will help me reap my wheat?" asked the little red hen. "Not I," said the duck. "Out of my classification," said the pig. "I'd lose my seniority," said the cow. "I'd lose my unemployment compensation," said the goose. "Then I will," said the little red hen, and she did. At last it came time to bake the bread. "Who will help me bake bread?" asked the little red hen. "Oh, that'd be overtime for me," said the cow. "I'd lose my welfare benefits," said the duck. "I'm a dropout and never learned how," said the pig. "Well, if I'm to be the only helper, that's discrimination," said the goose. "Then I will," said the little red hen. She baked 5 loaves and held them up for her neighbors to see. They all wanted some, and in fact demanded a share. But the little red hen said, "No, I can eat the 5 loaves myself." "Excess profits," cried the cow. "Capitalist leech," screamed the duck. "I demand equal rights," yelled the goose. And the pig just grunted. And they painted unfair picket signs and marched round and round the little red hen, shouting obscenities. When the government agent came, he said to the little red hen, "You must not be greedy." "But I earned the bread," said the little red hen. "Exactly," said the agent. "That's the wonderful free enterprise system. Anyone in the barnyard can earn as much as he wants. But under our modern government regulations, the productive workers must divide their product with the idle." And they lived happily ever after, including the little red hen, who smiled and clucked, "I am grateful, I am grateful." But her neighbors wondered why she never again baked any more bread.
Trickle-down theory and tax cuts for the rich. Thomas Sowell, in his new booklet, quote, "At various times and places, particular individuals have argued that existing tax rates are so high that the government would collect more tax revenues if it lowered those tax rates." Close quote. Explain that argument.
Oh, the argument is based on the belief that people will change their behavior as you change the tax rates. Those on the left often act as if human beings are just like inert blocks of wood, or like chess pieces that you can move around on the chessboard to put wherever you want to carry out some grand design. But of course, people react to these things. Now, it's a theory, it's a hypothesis, and you could test it. Almost never is it tested. People instead say, "Oh, you just want to give tax cuts to the rich."
Right. Now, you note in this booklet, brief as it is, you cover a lot of ground here. You write about various times and places people have advocated this, and you note several in particular. Republican Treasury Secretary Andrew Mellon argued for lower tax rates in the 20s. Democratic President John Kennedy argues for cuts in the tax rates in the 1960s. Republican President Ronald Reagan, lower tax rates in the 80s, and then George W. Bush lowers tax rates once again in the 2000s. Four experiments, as it were, one by a Democrat. In each of those four cases, what was the effect on the economy?
The effect on the economy was to increase the rate of growth, increase the revenue received by the government. The rich not only paid more taxes after the tax cuts for the rich, as they call it, they paid a higher percentage of all taxes. And this started back in the 1920s. In the early 20s, the tax rate on the top income was 73%. The people making over $100,000 paid something like 30% of all taxes. By the end of the decade, the tax rate on the top had been cut to 24%. People making over $100,000 now paid 65% of all taxes. And the reason was quite simple, that when you have the tax rate at 73%, people simply don't pay it. They put their money into tax-exempt securities and arrange their financial affairs. So what we're really talking about, do you want a symbolic high tax rate on the high-income people to win votes politically, which the rich themselves are not going to pay? Or do you really want more tax revenue coming into the government?
So the argument you say, it's an empirical matter. It can be tested. It has been tested.
It has been. 4
different times, and it always worked.
That's right.
All right. In Trickle-Down Theory and Tax Cuts for the Rich, you quote such liberal heroes, progressive heroes as Woodrow Wilson and John Maynard Keynes on the importance of keeping tax rates modest. The Keynes quotation is especially striking. Quote, John Maynard Keynes, "Taxation may be so high as to defeat its object. A reduction of taxation will run a better chance than an increase of balancing the budget." Close quote. Then you, Tom Sowell, write, "At this point there was not yet a sharp partisan difference on lowering high tax rates." Close quote. When did this sharp partisan difference emerge? What happened?
In the second half of the 20th century.
And on account of what?
I guess over time the Democrats moved further and further left. And so you had in the party only those people who thought it was wonderful to raise tax rates on high-income people.
Trickle-down and millionaires. Now, the attack on this theory, which has been tested and shown to work. President Obama in December of last year, "The market will take care of everything, they tell us. Jobs and prosperity will eventually trickle down to everyone else." In April of this year, during the Bush years, the wealthy got wealthier, but prosperity sure didn't trickle down. In July, this past summer, Barack Obama, "We've tried it their way. It didn't work. We were told that prosperity would start at the top and then trickle down." Close quote. Where does this phrase "trickle down" come from?
Oh, I don't know. It was as far back as the the Roosevelt administration. There is absolutely, it is an incredible thing. There is a non-existent theory that is constantly being attacked. Some years ago in my newspaper column, I challenged anybody to cite any economist outside of an insane asylum who had ever made that argument. Nobody ever came up with a single person.
So when Barack Obama says in this past July, quote, "We were told that prosperity..."
Ask him who told him.
Nobody told him.
Nobody told him.
No economist has ever held that. No politician has ever said it.
I don't know of anybody who's ever said it. In fact, when I put this out, and I went out a nationally syndicated column, various people wrote me and said, "Well, so-and-so said that, so-and-so said it." Find me the person who said it. I don't want to hear how A said that B said it. Find me B and show me where he said it. And that was years ago. Not one example has been offered.
All right. So trickle-down economics is not a political theory. It is a political, I beg your pardon, it's not an economic theory. It is a political hack phrase used.
It's a caricature.
Caricature.
Yeah. In other words, the argument really is not that you should put more money in the hands of the wealthy. It's also part of a zero-sum conception of the economy. There's the thought that if you cut the tax rates on the rich, why then there'll be less taxes for the government, or you'll have to raise the taxes on other people to make up the difference, or cut programs and so forth. So that I hear all the time. It drives me crazy.
So what about this notion, George Bush, it was a giveaway, that George Bush cut taxes on the rich, and if he had not done that, the budget would be much closer to balance. He was just giving it away. It was pointless. The sheer pointlessness.
Yes, but in the paper, I point out where the New York Times itself says, there's been an unexpectedly large increase in tax revenues from the wealthy and from corporations, which has reduced the projected budget deficit. And the question, yes, expectations are in the eyes of the beholder.
Unexpected by the New York Times.
Unexpected by the New York Times, exactly. Right. But that's exactly what people have been expecting for more, at that point, 3/4 of a century, and which has been happening, and the New York Times just chose not to understand it.
The idea that government had to protect us came to be accepted during the terrible years of the Depression. Capitalism was said to have failed, and politicians were looking for a new approach. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a candidate for the presidency. He was governor of New York State. At the governor's mansion in Albany, he met repeatedly with friends and colleagues to try to find some way out of the Depression. The problems of the day were to be solved by government action and government spending. The measures that FDR and his associates discussed here derived from a long line of past experience. Some of the roots of these measures go back to Bismarck's Germany at the end of the 19th century, the first modern state to institute old age pensions and other similar measures on the part of government. In the early 20th century, Great Britain followed suit. Under Lloyd George and Churchill, it too instituted old age pensions and similar plans. These precursors of the modern welfare state had little effect on practice in the United States, but they did have a very great effect on the intellectuals on the campus, like those who gathered here with FDR. The people who met here had little personal experience of the horrors of the Depression, but they were confident that they had the solution. In their long discussions as they sat around this fireplace, trying to design programs to meet the problems raised by the worst depression in the history of the United States, they quite naturally drew upon the ideas that were prevalent at the time. The intellectual climate had become one in which it was taken for granted that government had to play a major role in solving the problems, in providing what came later to be called security from cradle to grave. Roosevelt's first priority after his election was to deal with massive unemployment. A public works program was started. The government financed projects to build highways, bridges, and dams. The National Recovery Administration was set up to revitalize industry. Roosevelt wanted to see America move into a new era. The Social Security Act was passed and other measures followed: unemployment benefits, welfare payments, distribution of surplus food. With these measures, of course, came rules, regulations, and red tape, as familiar today as they were novel then. The government bureaucracy began to grow, and it's been growing ever since. The people who get on welfare lose their human independence and feeling of dignity. They become subject to the dictates and whims of their welfare supervisor, who can tell them whether they can live here or there, whether they may put in a telephone, what they may do with their lives. They're treated like children, not like responsible adults. And they're trapped in the system. Maybe a job comes up that looks better than welfare, but they're afraid to take it, because if they lose it after a few months, it may be 6 months or 9 months before they can get back onto welfare. And as a result, this becomes a self-perpetuating cycle, rather than simply a temporary state of affairs. The officials of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare are dedicated people. Their motives are good. Their achievements are not. The results of these programs have been disappointing. Why? I believe that the basic reason is because it is very hard to achieve good objectives through bad means. And the means we have been using are bad in two very different respects. In the first place, all of these programs involve some people spending other people's money for objectives that are determined by still a third group of people. Nobody spends somebody else's money as carefully as he spends his own. Nobody has the same dedication to achieving somebody else's objectives that he displays when he pursues his own. Beyond this, the programs have an insidious effect on the moral fiber of both the people who administer the programs and the people who are supposedly benefiting from it. For the people who administer it, it instills in them a feeling of almost godlike power. For the people who are supposedly benefiting, it instills a feeling of childlike dependence. Their capacity for personal decision-making atrophies. The result is that the programs involve a misuse of money. They do not achieve the objectives which it was their intention to achieve. But far more important than this, they tend to rot away the very fabric that holds a decent society together.
As I looked at the film, I had a growing sense of anger. Anger that that position failed to recognize that the system that was being attacked was necessary in our capitalistic free enterprise system that by its own failure produces poverty and therefore requires governmental intervention in the interest of those people caught in the traps of poverty. So as I sat and looked at the film and as I hear Dr. Friedman's statement, I was aroused to the point, as I said, of anger, because only half the story is told. We are really blaming again a victim, this time a system, the welfare system, for the failure of other systems to operate in the interest of people.
Let's get other reactions now to that statement. Trying to do good with other people's money simply has not worked. The welfare system is rotting away the very fabric of society. Tom Sowell.
My reaction was just the opposite. My anger was at what had been created in the city where I grew up under very different conditions during the period of capitalistic failure, during the period when there wasn't this humanitarianism, and where it was possible for people to live better and to get out of that poverty. Now I think someone living in the very same place where I lived would find it much harder to escape from that poverty because of all these things.
When the family fails, when the private sector fails to create jobs at a fast enough rate, you find that people are unemployed and drift into needing help in order to exist. And the welfare system was created in the 30s to do exactly that. When the private sector essentially failed, we have the development of a welfare system. It is not corrupting society, it is taking what society institutions have left behind. The family breaking up, the economy not expanding fast enough, the health system failing, the educational system not doing its job. We have untrained, unskilled people looking for jobs in a highly technical society, or jobs that pay so low that people cannot, in fact, live in a decent level of humanity. I see the welfare system not corrupting, but in fact taking the remains and attempting to help people live in dignity.
So, rotting away the fabric of society is not supported, except perhaps by you. Would you back that phrase?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You're talking about the failures of the other parts of society. What the welfare system and other kinds of governmental programs are doing is paying people to fail. Insofar as they fail, they receive the money. Insofar as they succeed, even to a moderate extent, the money is taken away. This is even extended into the school systems, where they will give money to schools with low scores. Insofar as the school improves its education, the money is taken away, so that you are subsidizing people to fail in their own private lives and become more dependent upon the handouts.
We have expectations built in today about the quality of life, the quality of job, the level of income for which one expects in return. Why? Because we look at the level around us that it takes us to have a fairly decent level.
No, that's not why. I may have all sorts of expectations. The question is, what can I do? If someone else is subsidizing my expectations will be far higher. Insofar as the Center for Advanced Study was subsidizing my expectations a few years ago, I refused to work at UCLA for the normal full professor's salary. Why should I, when I can get the same money for being at the Center for Advanced Study with no hours, no duties, and no classes?
I think it is overly broad to say that we turn people into helpless children.
I don't remember talking to anyone who's ever been on welfare who didn't think they were being treated like children while they were on it.
Of course, one must make a difference, a distinction between the system that was set up to help people and the people who are employed in that system. Look at any public welfare system around the country, and we have practically few trained people to work with people. We employ the ill-trained, people who are not equipped to be helping people. We say they're social workers. They're not social workers. They have neither the skills, the attitudes, and some of them not even the concern. So I think one has to separate out a conceptual framework of a system designed to help people and what the country and community puts into that system to implement those programs.
You mean separate the hopes from the reality?
I separate the skills that are available in order to implement what the objectives of the program are. And I think we have to separate whether we're talking about program objectives or we're talking about how it operates. I would be the first to say that the system that I administered had ill-prepared people to do the job that we were set up to do. But I would not say that the system that we set up...
I've talked to some social welfare people who think that, in fact, they were so hamstrung by the system that there was very little they could do to help people to get off welfare. That is, to build up skills, get jobs, do whatever was necessary to get off welfare. They felt it was the system.
Bob Lappin, you
well,
have a
the
comment.
system that we're stereotyping is one of a great deal of paternalistic interference in individual families' lives.
I've never heard of a government program which was defective, in which the people who ran it didn't say, if only we had more money to spend on what we're not being able to accomplish with the amount we're spending now.
I think the other issue is that you have a whole group of people who are the single female head of a household. And yes, cut off welfare tomorrow. What will they do? What will be their immediate response? at what price to their small children and to their middle-aged children, yes, they'll get a job. In fact, the statistics show that women, in fact, are the most successful through the employment program. But what has to supplement that typically is the provision of some kind of daycare arrangement. Either the individual woman has to earn enough money to be able to pay privately for her daycare, or in fact she is, quote, subsidized through this insidious corrupting set of programs run by the federal government, which in fact makes her employable and a taxpayer. It's an interesting notion of trying to get people in a productive mode.
Tom Sowell.
It's incredible the way you start the story in the middle, as if there's a predestined amount of poverty, a predestined amount of unemployment, and that the welfare system is not itself in any way responsible for that.
There is a predestined 20% of the bottom half of the population.
I have never, well, that's always been true.
There's going to be 20% at the bottom.
I agree with you. It's also true that 20% of the bottom population doesn't have to be living on the government and ruled by the government. You mentioned, for example, the female-headed household. Many of those, in addition to the grown woman who has all the kids, are teenage pregnancies. There's not a predestined amount of teenage pregnancy. I grew up in an era when people, and particularly blacks, were a lot poorer than today, faced a lot more discrimination than today, and in which the teenage pregnancy rate was a lot lower than today. I don't believe there is a predestined amount of teenage pregnancy, a predestined amount of husband desertion. Gutman has done a study of the black family, showing that this whole notion that the black family has always been disintegrating, that is nonsense, that his studies go up to 1925, the great bulk of black families were intact, two-parent families up through 1925, and going all the way back through the era of slavery. So it is now only within our own time that we suddenly see this inevitable tragedy which the welfare system says it's going to rush in to solve, but which it is itself a part.
We're talking about a very small group. We're talking about 12% of the families are not intact, are not two-parent families at any one period of time.
I mean among welfare recipients?
No,
or the
among the
large?
public at large. We're talking about 12% of the families. 12%.
That's right.
That's a small number. But
not of those on welfare.
We're still talking about a significant component of the bottom 20% that are the bottom 20%. Whether they are above the poverty line or below the poverty line, they are still the bottom 20%. And the issue is, what is the responsibility of the other 80%, if any, toward those individuals?
Does your program plan to eliminate there being a bottom 20%?
No, but it intends to raise the bottom 20%. So
you're raising them by having more illegitimacy, more unemployment. That's
I'm not making them have illegitimate children. I hope that's clear.
Oh, I think. You don't have to do that. You simply subsidize it.
We as human beings don't have a responsibility, but I hope we have a compassion and an interest in the bottom 20%. And I only want to say to you that the capitalist system, the private enterprise system in the 19th century did a far better job of expressing that sense of compassion than the governmental welfare programs are today. The 19th century, the period which people denigrate as a high tide of capitalism, was a period of the greatest outpouring of eleemosynary and charitable activity that the world has ever known. And one of the things I hold against the welfare system most seriously is that it has destroyed private charitable arrangements which are far more effective, far more compassionate, far more person-to-person in helping people who are really, for no fault of their own, in disadvantaged situations.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Jimmy Mathis Show right here on TVFreeBaltimore.com. Jam-packed program today. Former Donald Trump top advisor Roger Stone joining the program momentarily. Right now, we are joined by Tyrone Keys, Jimmy Mathis Show economic strategist, also host of The Wealth Hustle, which is going very well. Congratulations, my friend.
Thank you, Jimmy. How you doing?
Doing well. Some sad news coming out on Friday, the passing of former President George H.W. Bush.
Right.
Very sad. A life very well lived, however.
Tremendous life. This guy was a war hero. Congressman, UN ambassador, envoy to China, vice president, and then, culminated his career in the presidency of the United States. So not only did he live a very full life, I think it's appropriate to also recognize the fact that his sons went on to become the governor of Florida.
Yeah.
And, of course, we know two-term President George H.W. Bush, which, if I'm correct, John Quincy Adams and John Adams were the only other father-son duo to ever, do the presidency like that. So.
Well, and it was looking like they were going to have the hat trick. Jeb Bush was the front runner for most of 2016.
Yes, he was, and then a wild card came in and gave us Donald Trump.
The rest is history.
Yeah, absolutely.
The big news this week: Tyrone Michael Cohen. It's coming to light that he had lied under testimony. We'll talk to Roger about this momentarily. This seems like it's more of a media play than anything at this point. But one of the questions I want to ask Roger is, there's an old saying, perception is reality. And we deal in the business of rhetoric and spin, how things are presented to the public.
Right.
And the problem with the Cohen story, from where I sit, it's the first time in the Mueller investigation where there is, I'm not saying this leads to collusion on the election, but at least there is a Russia connection. And that hasn't existed yet, by the way. You look at Paul Manafort, you look at Kelly, all these things that have come up as scandals under the Trump administration. This one does have a connection to the Russians.
Oh, no doubt, it does. I mean, again, though, I'm looking at this from the standpoint of somebody viewing it objectively. The connection that it has, from where I sit, is not one that looks conspiratorial to me. It just looks like there were some business discussions that took place, and they decided not to do some things. That's not new for the Trump organization, because they have properties all around the world.
Sure.
So that's not unique in any way, shape, or form. So I think, again, it's going to turn out to be much ado about nothing. But the media is hyping it because they're no longer objective, and they want to see Donald Trump not only impeached, but if you listen to what Joe Scarborough had to say a few weeks ago on MSNBC, he was very vitriolic in terms of what he wanted to see happen to Trump's family.
Oh, right. Well, and and you're seeing that in the rhetoric in the national media right now. Trump was a very unique candidate. Not the first president to seek the office that had come from money. George Bush came from money. Obama, not so much. The Clintons, not so much. But for the most part, people that run for president, they start at lower levels of government. They've been public servants their whole life. They become multimillionaires after they leave office. Again, the Bushes, not the case. Donald Trump, definitely not the case. I really feel like the conversation that we're having right now, whether you support Trump or you don't support Trump, it was baked into the cake. We have never had a president at this level that assumed the office with so much wealth, with such a vast business that was globally stretched. And most reasonable people, I think, understand there was no way to disconnect him from that. And keep in mind, what we're talking about right now was a possible real estate deal, one that never came to fruition. That was when he was a candidate. So other than him liquidating his entire company, which wasn't going to happen, it was baked into the cake on this. Even if you don't like Donald Trump, you knew that back in 2016.
You knew that in 2016, and again, there was no deal that took place. I think they would have more mileage out of this if there was some building in Moscow right now with the name Trump on it, but there isn't. So apparently they made a business decision not to do it. I'm sure in retrospect, Trump is, glad that he didn't do it. But
in all fairness on that, they pulled the plug on that deal when it became public with the Russians hacking into the DNC emails. But even that, from a rhetoric standpoint, proves as soon as something hinky was going on, Trump de-invested himself from it. And I'm not sitting here supporting Trump on everything and saying he's an angel, But once there was something that didn't look right, he didn't throttle up. He
Right.
ejected out of the deal.
Right. And again, I think I support what you're saying 100%. I'm not saying that Trump is an absolute angel either, but when it comes to this investigation, okay, it's a sham investigation. It's just designed to have the power structure in the country try to attack an outsider and also to discourage outsiders from running in the future.
Right.
Okay. Now, we didn't see this when we just talked about George H.W. Bush. When Ross Perot became the disruptive factor in that election between Bush and Clinton, and Perot ended up getting like almost 20% of the vote.
Right, right.
Perot was a billionaire. And, okay, fine. There were no recriminations after that. Perot went on and lived his life. But we're in a different environment now, and one in which if a Democrat loses an election, there's got to be something wrong. How could the people have deemed not to accept them? We saw it in Florida. We saw it in Georgia.
Right.
So that's why we're getting all of this, rigmarole with Mueller and Trump.
Well, the blowback with the rhetoric Donald Trump on lock her up regarding to Hillary Clinton was now you're basically living in a banana republic where you have a sitting president that's using the power of the government to go after political opposition. That's not the way it works here. Well, that's not what's happening. And there should be a real investigation into if we're going to have an honest conversation about Russian collusion
Absolutely.
into the Obama administration, the abuse of power, the obstruction of justice, by the way, even before there was this special investigation going on. Trump is not pushing any of this, okay? Forget some 3 a.m. tweets, but he's not pushing any of that forward.
And I think that that's a mistake. Uranium One happened, okay? This is clear, unbridled collusion with a foreign power, and not just on something mundane. We're talking about material that is used for one major purpose.
Absolutely.
And that is the creation of the types of weapons that Russia has pointed at us right now.
Right.
So, and our allies as well. So I think that if any investigation is warranted, we really need to look into Uranium One.
It's interesting. There was a piece in The Hill last week. Hillary Clinton has something to say about everything going on right now, as does Barack Obama, for the way. Hillary is definitely not painting the picture that she wants nothing to do in 2020.
No, she's not. And she is testing the waters. I found it interesting that her and Bill Clinton, they're having financial issues, apparently, because donations to the Clinton Foundation are down 90%.
Which makes
There's
sense.
no more influence to peddle.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So they've started this multi-city tour. They had the first one somewhere up in Canada last week, and they said 83% of the venue was not filled.
Right.
Okay. There is no demand to hear from these people on current policy issues. The woman had her shot. The Democrats chose to nominate an unknown black dude, over and above Hillary Clinton the first time.
Right.
And the second time, Trump shocked the world and defeated her. So the Democrats they've got this hankering to hold on to these legacy people like Pelosi, But I think they'll deep six Clinton in the coming election, even if she decides to run.
Well, the party right now is Barack Obama, and we fast forward to January, and we are going to be staring down 2020.
Sure.
Obama hasn't put his support behind anybody. He's kind of been back on the campaign trail, but he is the rock star of the party right now. He doesn't have to in the near future, but you get into the summer of next year, he's going to have to pick what horse he wants to align himself with.
Sure.
I don't see that being Hillary. I think he would like to back Joe Biden, but Biden's getting up there, and there's been some health issues with him. Cory Booker's name has been thrown around, along with Elizabeth Warren. I don't see any stars on the benches. As much as they want to take Trump down in a midterm election, I don't see it.
Well, you're right in terms of him having to choose, and he's got slim pickings right now.
He does.
Okay. Cory Booker, for a variety of reasons, that's not going to work. Kamala Harris seems like she wants to sabotage any hope she had of even becoming vice president with some of her rhetoric.
Right.
I think that Obama is probably looking at a Gavin Newsom or somebody like that who most of America isn't thinking about just yet. But Newsom is fairly new on the scene nationally.
Right.
He's the governor of California now, okay? We all know those 55 votes would go the Democrats' way anyway.
Sure. Right.
But I think he's going to look deep into their lineup and pick somebody like that. And I'm going to tell you this. I don't think Trump's going to run again.
I disagree with that. I was thinking about this the other day, and that thought's been out there since the very beginning on it. Trump loves the media. He loves the attention. He loves power. And power is very different than wealth.
That's very true.
And people enjoy this on the wealth hustle. People, they combine the two, and they're very, very, very different. I do not see Trump wanting to give this up at all. There is no bigger stage in the presidency of the United States.
Well, we'll bet a stake on that. I just think
But let Steve Stone know that I still won for 8 years ago.
Right. I think that being the showman that he is, I think he's going to leave us wanting more. I think he's going to leave us wanting more, and I think he's going to calculate that in the second term of any president, that president becomes less popular, less loved, and there are some issues with our economy that are going to rear their head as we go forward into 2020. And I think that Trump's going to say, you know what, I've built a legacy in these 4 years, I'm bowing out.
I think whether he runs for a second term or not is all up to the Democrats right now. We'll see what comes out of this Mueller report. We'll see what the Democrats want to do now that they control the House. If they use the next 2 years to target this president, and that doesn't, by the way, that doesn't have to mean that they impeach him. Right. But if they flood him with, subpoenas and all this other kind of stuff, and you poke the bear,
well,
it's also going to energize the Republicans. There's nobody on the bench for the Democrats, and it's just going to piss them off.
Well, that is true, and we've seen what he's done when you aggravate him.
Yeah.
And I mean, he's got it coming from. Look at what Baltimore City just did. Okay, with suing the administration.
Yeah.
All of the problems that Baltimore City has, and they find the time and the resources to not only sue the administration, but sue them on behalf of people who are not even citizens.
It's how tone deaf leadership is in this city and state. Very disappointed with Mayor Catherine Pugh on that. It's completely out of harmony with the wishes of city residents. By the way, Hogan's no better, and it's what led Trump to the White House.
That's true.
It was his original thing was running on illegal immigration. You can disagree with the way that he presented it, but the lightning that he has caught in the bottle is the frustration that the majority of American citizens feel, which is their government does not advocate in their best interest.
Right.
And this move last week with the city on this lawsuit is a perfect example of it. Hogan is another, the amnesty cities and states, and whether that, by the way, to that point, whether it's technically an amnesty city or jurisdiction, it really doesn't matter.
Right.
Okay, it's the perception of it, and that the government is constantly advocating for somebody else. Same reason why people care about free trade right now. When was free trade a front row issue in politics? Okay, and that's what Trump has tied into, and that anger is real.
Oh, that's true. That's true, and it's growing in communities and constituencies that were traditionally staunch allies of the Democrats. Because, for example, in Baltimore City, you have a growing group of blacks who are saying, wait a minute, now they're bending over backwards to bring in new residents who are not citizens and do all kinds of things for them to increase the tax base, okay? Right. But they will not do the things that are necessary. And I talked about this in the op-ed with Professor Vatz in Maryland Reporter. They will not do the things that are necessary to encourage economic empowerment among the citizens that are here right now. They just refuse to.
Right, and you can steal the the slogan of New Americans, which was coming out of World War II. It's a different time, and it's also under much different circumstances. Tyrone Keys, host of The Wealth Hustle. How can people learn more about you, Tyrone?
They can go on to Facebook and just type in The Wealth Hustle, join that page, check us out on YouTube, subscribe to that, and of course you can catch our show here on TV Free Baltimore. every 2 weeks.
Good stuff. Tyrone Keys coming up next. Roger Stone, former Donald Trump top advisor and center of a lot of national media attention, joins the program next, right here on the Jimmy Mathis Show on TVFreeBaltimore.com.
Hi, this is Cindy Williams, and you're watching TV Free Baltimore.
This is Gunhild Carling, and you are watching TV Free Baltimore. You are not watching. You have to watch TV Free Baltimore.
Why is Mueller only interested in Russian collusion on the Republican side? He uses to look at the crimes of Mr. Mueller and the Obamas and the Clinton administration, the Clinton Foundation, the Obama FBI. It's very clear you have a partisan witch hunt here. You have a special prosecutor who's only interested in the potential crimes of Donald Trump and his associates or his campaign. He has no interest in the misdeeds of the Clintons, no interest in the activities of the Clinton Foundation, which was a multi-billion-dollar slush fund, which was the vehicle for the facilitation of multi-million-dollar bribes. Not interested, because the point of this investigation is not Paul Manafort or Michael Cohen or Jerry Corsi or Roger Stone, for that matter. The point of this investigation is taking down Donald Trump, undoing what they could not do at the ballot box in 2016. Clearly, the president holds some cards of his own.
Well, he does, Roger. I guess the question is, how many sacrificial lambs are there going to be in this process before Manafort has to turn over his report? I mean, 2 of the 4 names you just mentioned are in jail right now.
Look, nobody has borne the brunt of this more than I have, but after 2 years under the legal proctological examination that Mr. Mueller has submitted me to, they still have no evidence of Russian collusion, no evidence of WikiLeaks collaboration, no evidence that I knew about the source or the content of either allegedly stolen or allegedly hacked emails. This is a dead end. Now they're talking about criminalizing political gossip. Well, if that's true, then Jimmy, you're in big trouble, because that's what we traffic in all day. I think it's called politics.
Right.
So, I think the American people have run their course with this. They now, by a majority in almost most polls, see this as politically motivated. It's time to bring this to an end. You know, the political expense to me is one thing, but the financial expense to me is something else. I mean, this is destroying my family financially. I have been under at least 7 individual investigations, all of which have turned up nothing but gossip. And no, I'm a loyal American. My relatives, who happen to be Hungarian, were mowed down by Russian tanks in Budapest in 1956. So accusing me of working for the Russians is an insult. I'm a loyal American. My crime is supporting Donald Trump for president and helping defeat Hillary Clinton.
I think it raises a larger question of the power that Mueller has. I believe the price tag is up to $30 million right now. Really, that bank account is endless. He can go on as far as he wants. But it ties back, and Roger, I was no fan of Bill Clinton, but Ken Starr was not looking for Monica Lewinsky, okay? I mean, these investigations should be very narrow in scope. That was a whitewater investigation. It went on in perpetuity, and finally, again, the president wasn't removed and didn't leave office, but they were able to move forward on articles of impeachment off of something that had nothing to do with what the original investigation was for. And that's kind of where I see this going right now with Donald Trump. The point that you have made time and time again, what we're talking about, or allegedly what the investigation should be about, is collusion with the Russians. There has been no proof of that over the last 2 years. Yet the investigation continues to go forward. There's collateral damage, whether it's Paul Manafort or the amount of money that you personally have spent defending yourself on these various accusations. Where does it end?
Well, if you go back and look, Jimmy, you'll see that I was, even though I'm a hyper-partisan Republican, I was critical of the Clinton investigation. Let me get this straight. You were going to remove the president for getting oral sex in the Oval Office? This was a waste of the taxpayers' time and money. I think there were legitimate issues, pertaining to the sale of technology to the Chinese in return for campaign contributions, other business dealings with Russia that may have merited impeachment by Bill Clinton. But Monica Lewinsky, no. But at least at that time, there was a special counsel law. At least at that time, you had to, if you were the special counsel, you had to go to a 3-judge federal panel to approve an expansion of your mandate. There are no checks and balances on Mr. Mueller. He reports to no one. As you point out, he has an unlimited budget. He can examine anything and anyone he wants. I don't think this is what the Congress intended. I don't think this is what the constitutional founders he's become a fourth branch of government. This protection bill in which the legislative prohibits the executive from their appointment power or their ability to terminate is clearly unconstitutional. It's not even worth talking about. So I agree with you, Jimmy, that this should have been focused. It should have been narrowed, but Rod Rosenstein has been the only oversight of Mr. Mueller, which is why he's been allowed to examine anything he wants, including, areas that have nothing to do with Russian collusion or the 2016 Trump campaign.
And Roger, I've always said words mean things. There is a big difference between meddling and collusion, and also political information isn't criminal.
Look, I have been investigated now for, it turns out, 3 years, because I now know that I was under surveillance in 2016. I'd like to know the probable cause for that.
Right.
And they will find no Russian collusion, no WikiLeaks collaboration. As I said earlier, no evidence that I knew about the source or content of the WikiLeaks disclosures, be they allegedly hacked emails or allegedly stolen emails. Those are the facts. The fact that I discuss these public matters with others on email or in text messages, that's called political discourse. It's legal, but there's no evidence of wrongdoing here, and therefore they just continue to dig, looking for something else. Again, I think I've been targeted because of my 40-year friendship with the president. Big story in the Washington Post this past week about the fact that the president and I spoke on the phone when he was a candidate, spoke on the phone when he was president-elect, have talked on the phone since he was elected president. I've always taken the position that those are private phone calls. But I will say this, when the president calls you, I can tell you one thing. He does most of the talking, you do most of the listening. Beyond that, I can categorically say we never discussed WikiLeaks or the WikiLeaks disclosures or Hillary Clinton's emails or anything of the sort. But the idea of the Washington Post trying to plot out events based on the date of a phone call and then the date something happened in public and make any claim, that's supposition. That's irresponsible. Unless you have a tape recording of our phone call, in which case I'd like to know why anybody's recording the phone calls of the President of the United States or a candidate for president, and I have no fear if there were such recordings, by the way, then this is all irresponsible supposition by the Washington Post.
So, and that's been your stated stance on this, forever. And the president came out in his written response and said that you guys never had any conversations regarding WikiLeaks. I mean, I'm sure at some point you had talked about WikiLeaks. It wasn't that you were discussing what was going to come out of information that was going to be released. I mean, we talk about WikiLeaks every single week. So
I actually don't think it ever came up.
Really? Okay.
Conversations with him are always short because he's always on the move. He was running for president, and it was usually just touching base to say, how are we doing? How do you think it looks? Don't worry about the next debate. I'm going to kill her. I mean, it's just kind of classic, confident Donald Trump touching base. One of these things I always find interesting is I read in the paper or I see on TV, the president is angry, the president is depressed, the president is furious, the president is brooding. And then you talk to him and he's upbeat and he's optimistic. It sounds great. You say, wow, I guess that was all fake news.
Well, Roger, it's an interesting time for the Republicans. We're going through that right now. We'll blink our eyes. We'll be into our 90-day legislative session here. So, like I've always said, it's an important time for Republicans to reestablish what they stand for, what they believe in, and something that we have a hard time doing here locally.
Well, this new gun package by your governor, Larry Hogan, just amazes me. I mean, I thought he was a Republican. The Second Amendment is enshrined in the Constitution. So things seem to be rather backwards there in the state of Maryland.
Well, they are, Roger, and we will continue that next week. Roger Stone, former Donald Trump top advisor, also author of his newest book, Stone's Rules, How to Win at Politics, Business, and Style. Roger, thank you very much for your time. I always appreciate it, my friend.
Jimmy.
Thank you very much. Talk to you next week.
Some people have a deep, abiding respect for the natural beauty that was once this country. And some people don't. People start pollution. People can stop it.
Hi. Hi. I'm Dawn Wells, and guess what? You are watching TV Free Baltimore.
Everybody, thank you so much for joining me here on the Jimmy Mathis Show. You can catch me every week at tvfreebaltimore.com. Much thanks to Tyrone Keys, host of The Wealth Hustle. Of course, Roger Stone for the Stone Zone every week here. Also, everyone have a wonderful week. We will see you back here for the Jimmy Mathis Show on tvfreebaltimore.com.
Now then, what makes a nation strong? Taxes? There's nothing new about those either. The first income tax was paid by Abraham. It was written on a rock by the hand of divinity and handed to Moses at the top of Mount Sinai. And you might want to remember this. It was at the flat rate of 10%. It promised the wrath of God on anybody who tampered with or violated that law. Christ was born in Bethlehem because Joseph was on his way to pay his taxes. Joseph was a relatively well-to-do landowner of the house and lineage of David. Yet the taxes exacted by Caesar Augustus were so exorbitant that he didn't have enough money left over to employ a trusted messenger for the mission, so though his wife was great with child, he made the journey himself. And Christ was born in Bethlehem because Joseph was on his way to pay his taxes. And Christ was born in a manger because there was a housing shortage when he got there. Our problems are not new. At Runnymede, the Magna Carta was handed to King John on the end of a sword, denying to royalty the right of unlimited taxation. Yet you know it was for us, the American people, to become the first in recorded history ever voluntarily to surrender our rights to private property. Oh, yes, we did. With an innocent-sounding constitutional amendment, the 16th, which says that Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived, and we forgot to put any limit on the extent to which we could tax ourselves. Conceivably, we could be taxed out of all private property. We could be taxed not 70%, 80%, 90%, but 100%. We could awaken one morning and find that the government owns the farm and the house and the car and has a mortgage on the church, legally. Historically, whenever any nation has taxed its people more than 25% of their national income, initiative was destroyed and that nation was headed for economic eclipse. Well, presently, the American people are being taxed 33% of their total income. History says we'll roll forward on momentum for a little while, but we'd better get some more gas in the tank pretty quick. You see, ours is not the first by George good government to arise on the world stage. There have been several. Rome, and Spain, and Greece, and China, and each enjoyed about 150 years at its zenith. That's just about our time in the New World. And then each decayed away. Not one of them was ever destroyed by anybody else's marching legions. Each rotted away, morally, socially, culturally, economically, simultaneously. You know, one of the most cruel paradoxes of history is this. Because each was a good government, it bore bountiful fruit. And when it bore bountiful fruit, the people got fat. And when they got fat, they got lazy. And when they got lazy, they began to want to absolve themselves of personal responsibility and turn over to government to do for them things which traditionally they had been doing for themselves. At first, there appears to be nothing wrong in asking government to perform some extra service for you, but if you ask government for extra services, government, in order to perform its increasing function, has to get bigger, right? And as government gets bigger, in order to support its increasing size, it has to what? Tax the individual more. So the individual gets littler. And to collect the increased taxes requires more tax collectors, so the government gets bigger, and in order to pay the additional tax collectors, it has to tax the individual more, so the government gets bigger and the individual gets littler. And the government gets bigger and the individual gets littler, until the government is all-powerful. The individual is hardly anything at all. The government is all-powerful. The people are cattle. Now, some believe that the need is for a vigorous, strong man to arise on the scene, to regulate and regiment the affairs of men. Yet history tells us there have been several such. Once upon a time, there was a nation great and powerful and good. She was suffering from the aftermath of war, from a depression. And then came upon the scene a leader, an idealist, self-confident, intolerant of criticism. Wisely, he limited his early activities to combating the financial depression. Nobody could argue with that. But in a while, he began to regulate business and establish new rules to govern commerce and finance. Some of them in diametrical disagreement with the God-made laws of supply and demand, but anybody who disagreed with those new rules was promptly fired. The new leader saw that under the old system of free enterprise, landlords prospered, so he levied new taxes to take away their profits and destroy what he called the monopoly of capital. To please laborers, he controlled prices. To win the favor of the farmers, he gave them loans and subsidies. The national debt mounted alarmingly. Whenever anybody tried to tell him that governments, even as people, can go broke when they spend beyond their incomes, he said they just didn't understand deficit finance. Well, what do you say? Did he build on rock or on sand? I say on sand. For you see, this was the story of Emperor Su Tongpo, who led China to its doom more than 1,000 years ago. I am satisfied with all my heart that if Uncle Sam ever does get whipped, here too, it will have been an inside job. It was internal decay. It was not external attack that destroyed the Roman Empire. Starting about 146 BC, internal conditions in Rome were characterized by a welter of class wars and conflicts, street brawls, corrupt governors, lack of personal integrity and moral responsibility. About 290 years after Christ, a Roman emperor named Diocletian took over. He really grabbed the bull by the horns. He took over in a period of turmoil and severe depression. The first thing Diocletian did was call in the gold and close the banks and raise the taxes. He reduced the power of the Senate, delegated its power to a lot of little government bureaus. Do you know they even had a Transportation Act back there prescribing the fee required to rent one laden ass per mile, and at today's rate of exchange it would have amounted to about 1/8 cent per mile, which meant that in order to make a profit, a jackass would have to carry 5 passengers? That was simply beyond the capacity of the jackass. Diocletian put millions of people on the public payroll, but when this failed to do the job, the country was still in trouble. He asked more personal powers for himself. For a brief while, incidentally, they were standby powers, but then he used them all at once. He froze wages, he froze prices, he froze jobs, he stopped profits, he dictated to the farmer what he should plant, when and how he should sell it, and for how much, and he rationed food. And what happened? The labor market closed down. Incentive was gone. Farm life became dependent on bureaucratic red tape. Exorbitant taxes cost the farmer his land. He kept for himself only a small plot on which he might grow turnips for his family. He lost the rest of it to the state. And without food and with incentive gone, city life stagnated and declined. And Rome passed into what history has recorded as the Dark Ages, lasting 1,000 years. Just by turning to the left, the world has gone in circles. A nation would evolve from a monarchy into an oligarchy, from oligarchy to dictatorship, from dictatorship to bureaucracy, from bureaucracy to pure democracy, where finally the people would cry out from the chaos and confusion of the streets, "Oh, please, God, give us a king," and God would give them a king, and they'd have a monarchy again and start the whole silly cycle anew. Now, either we will profit from the errors of their ways, or it follows as the night the day, our children are going to have to relive the Dark Ages all over again. How come, after thousands of years of experiment, our new nation has come so far so fast? All this in less than 200 years. What is the secret of our success? Well, I think it had to do with a basic American's creed. Perhaps it never passed the pioneer's lips in this form, but if it had, I think he would have said something like this: I believe in my God, in my country, and in myself. I know that sounds like a trite, too simple thing to say, and yet it's a rare man today who will dare to stand up and say, I believe in my God and my country and in myself, and in that order. When the early American pioneer first turned his eyes toward the west, there were only Indian trails, or traces as they were called, for him to follow through the wilderness. Do you know today you can roller skate from Miami to Seattle? From San Diego to Plymouth Rock? In this little bitty instant, as historical time is measured, our 7% of the Earth's population has come to possess more than half of all the world's good things. How come? Well, sir, when that early pioneer turned his eyes toward the west, he didn't demand that somebody else look after him. He didn't demand a free education. He didn't demand a guaranteed rocking chair at eventide. He didn't demand that somebody else take care of him if he got ill or got old. There was an old-fashioned philosophy in those days that a man was supposed to provide for his own and for his own future. He didn't demand a maximum amount of money for a minimum amount of work. Nor did he expect pay for no work at all. Come to think of it, he didn't demand anything. That hard-handed pioneer just looked out there at the rolling plains, stretching away to the tall green mountains, and then lifted his eyes to the blue skies and said, thank you, God. Now I can take it from here. Now, that spirit isn't dead in our country. It's dormant. It's been discredited in some circles, driven underground, but it isn't dead. It's just that a few seasons ago, politicians baiting their hooks with free barbecue and trading a Ponzi promise for votes began telling us we don't want opportunity anymore, we want security. We don't want opportunity, they said, we want security. And they said it so often we came to believe them. We wanted security. And they gave us chains, and we were secure. Suddenly, with our constitutional guarantees depleted, with our national character eroding away, with our tax laws penalizing those who dare to prosper, with workers concentrating on how little they can get by with instead of how much they can produce, suddenly we looked overhead one day to discover that the first tin moon in space was a Russian accomplishment. That free men dragging their feet had been outdistanced by slave workers dragging their chains. And we were sore afraid. Perhaps this was a disguised blessing, too. Maybe a dramatic accomplishment by this Cold War adversary was necessary to get us off our dead centers and back to work again. If we can revive in ourselves, then in our youth, something of that basic American's creed, the horizon has never, ever been so limitless. For man stands now on the threshold of his highest adventure of all, his first faltering footsteps into space. 20 years from today, half of the products you will be using in your everyday living aren't even in the dictionary yet. We've got it made. If we just keep on keeping on, we've got it made. And if we don't, we will follow those other great nation-states of history into the graveyard of ignominious oblivion. History promises only this for certain. We will get exactly what we deserve.
You're watching Maryland Politics here on TV Free Baltimore.
Hello, this is Paul Stefan, again for Maryland Politics here on TV Free Baltimore. And today our guest is Bob Conkey, who recently ran for House of Delegates in District 12. Welcome again, Bob.
Well, thanks, guys, for having me here. I think this is my third time here. At least I'm not as nervous as I was the first time.
You're a friend of the station.
First time we hardly talked. But anyway, thanks for all the good work that you and Charles do.
Unfortunately, you lost.
Right.
And I want to start with, what do you think were the factors in your loss?
Well, you don't have to be a genius to see why guys like Alan Tilghman, who's a Republican, running the second most wealthiest county in the country, has no dirty laundry at all, runs the #1 school system in the entire country, lost. Somebody like Senator Gail Bates loses. It's a numbers game, and unfortunately, we're outnumbered by the Democrats. And also, I will give credit to the opponents that I ran against. Very quality people, Dr. Terry Hill, Eric Ebersol. Jessica Feldmark, I never got the chance to meet, but I got beat by some quality people. And there's no grind over spilled milk. It was a great experience for me. And I guess you would have to equate my race for the delegate seat as a football term, since the Ravens are playing right now. Hopefully they're winning. You know, my race in football terms was a Hail Mary pass. I think there's only been one Republican that's ever won that seat. It's been gerrymandered, but it was a great experience for me, and I would do it again. It was a learning experience for me. And we need to keep two parties, but I think that we need to erase that imaginary line between Democrats and Republicans and try to have a more cohesive system. Well, like Governor Hogan, like him or not, I mean, Governor Hogan's done an excellent job, and the results from the election show what he's done in a Republican, in a Democratic-controlled state. You know, I had a breakfast with Governor Ehrlich approximately a week after I filed, and he said, Bob, he said, you know, it's not going to be easy to win in the 12th district. And I knew that going into it, Paul.
Okay. Well, again, to kind of enlighten people, why did you run in the first place? It was the first time you ever ran.
Well,
after many years in business.
Right. For my family, it was a hard decision. For me, I mean, Governor Ehrlich told me, the first thing he told me, he said, Bob, this is a marathon. This is not a sprint. And I thought, how hard can it be? You know, and then after you file every day, you know, you open your phone up, your text messages, your emails, and there's 20 people wanting you to fill out questionnaires, surveys. There's 5 or 6 different organizations wanting you to come to speak. And I really wasn't prepared for it. I've always been, as a small businessman, I've always been involved in neighborhood associations. I'd rather be a player than an observer. Or, for instance, my son even asked me, he goes, Dad, why would you do this? I go, why do you volunteer 15, 20 hours a week at the fire department and don't get paid? It's because you want to. And I said, I want to. And I have no regrets, none at all.
Now, what were your issues, actually, or what do you still think the issues are?
Well, the issues for me today are the same as they were when I probably was here back in February. And that's to try to have a transparency and accountability with where our tax dollars go, to try to create more of a level playing field for everybody. And same thing I said in February, what's good for Towson is good for Lansdowne. It might sound a little bit corny, but, you know, we all got to work together. I mean, and I'm talking about race, I'm talking about religions. I mean, wouldn't it be boring if we were all just plain old vanilla and that's all we had every day? So for me personally, I think that the citizens of Baltimore and the surrounding counties, if you look at old pictures, black and white pictures, and I don't know if it's because of the railroad was started here and then we had a great port. Baltimore was one of the first cities that the black migration headed north came to, where they could find jobs, even though they were menial jobs. And if you look at these old pictures, you'll see that black and whites were side by side working together at the railroad and at the ports. There's no reason with what we've been given economically and the natural resources that we have, Baltimore should be when I say Baltimore, and I mean the surrounding areas, whether it's Glen Burnie, Lansdowne,
Sure.
There's no reason with what we've been given on a natural basis with the Inner Harbor, the Chesapeake Bay, and the Eastern Shore we have, that Baltimore isn't the shining jewel of the Mid-Atlantic or the entire East Coast. I know that we've got the best people. We have all the ingredients to put together. We just need somebody to put them together. And I thought that I could be a small part of that as a state delegate.
Now, what would you feel, I guess maybe we didn't ask you at the time, being so many years as a small businessman, if you had gotten in office, what would you do for the small business people? Because a lot of Maryland laws right now work against the small business person.
Well, I'll tell you, Paulie, that's probably a great question for me. I wish I had a perfect answer. I don't.
Well, to give me an imperfect answer.
You know, in Virginia, for instance, you can go to one office and get a permit to build a house from top to bottom in approximately an hour. To go through any, and I'm sure you guys have probably experienced it here with licensing. It's go to this building, wait, no, you're in the wrong place. Go over to, you know, Fayette Street. No, it's, you know, we have to become business friendly because after all, this country was built by small business people, not by politicians. So I know a lot of people down there in the legislature, and all of them Democrats, and I consider a lot of my friends. I thought that if I went down there with my small business experience, I could get together with them and try to come to an agreement on what we can do to cut out some of the BS and red tape involved for the small businessman today. Now, actually, I got a call yesterday for a gas station right down the street here. An inspector came in and said, well, there's some water around your tanks. I'm calling you. Your fuel is shut off. Right on the corner down here.
Wow.
So when they're out of gas, which is probably going to be Tuesday, some inspector out of nowhere says, I mean, it's a little complicated, but you know, we have to treat the business person like we treat these sports celebrities as stars. That particular gas station and convenience store down here, so that they employ approximately 19 people, full-time and part-time. So I'm going to request a hearing first thing tomorrow with the Maryland Department of the Environment and see if a single inspector has the authority to call their supplier and cut their supply of gas off without first having a second opinion. I actually have on my phone copies of their inspections. There's no leakage at their tanks. There's no water in their tanks. So this is all done like computerized. But these are the kind of things, you know, we have to work in a common sense fashion. If you're a small businessman, I mean, it's not always easy.
Right.
So another thing is, as businesses are leaving Baltimore City, there was over 62 restaurants and taverns that closed up in Baltimore City last year.
Wow, that's
now,
a lot.
I don't know the exact amount of residents that left Baltimore City last year, but as the population shrinks and our cost overruns on government contracts escalate because of the good old boy system, as the tax base shrinks, I mean, it's got to be a matter of time. When you lose small businesses, which generates sales taxes and hires people, even if it's a kid working after school to get a little pocket change, you know, there's got to be a point in time when you rob Peter to pay Paul that Peter runs out of money. And I can actually see, and I don't know, and not too distant of a future where the city could actually default on making their municipal payroll. And they'll be looking for another bailout from the government, from Annapolis. So I can't change everything if I would have been elected. But I could have started a little ripple or at least brought some things to the forefront. And I think Governor Hogan's done a pretty good job, as well as Peter Francho, our controller.
Okay. Now, I was going to say that, in offense, we got why you ran. So how was your campaign organized and how did you run it?
Well, you know, I basically was the campaign. We didn't hire somebody to put our signs up. We for sure controlled the sign locations in the Baltimore County part of the district. Knowing that 91% of the time, incumbents win that seat. I did not want to solicit or waste a lot of friends' money. I ran it on a very, very tight budget because my son and I did a lot of the work. We put our own signs up, we took our own signs down. We moved them to the polling places, we took them down. Some of the things that don't cost money is not missing any community meetings. I don't think I missed any. I attended every forum. That does not cost money. I think that the sign selections that I chose were economical. You know, they were smart decisions. And if you drove through the 12th district, I had the district surrounded. So if you have 25 or 50 signs and your opponent has 200, if you've got the smart locations, it doesn't matter. People couldn't get into Arbutus without passing my signs. So
there you go.
You know, I learned a lot. There were some things I didn't do that, you know, I think I should have. Because I didn't have a primary, I did not really campaign prior to the... And I was visiting businesses then, asking permission for these premium sign locations. But, you know, I don't know, but I do know I was outnumbered, and I'm not using that as an excuse. Nobody on the Republican slate won at any of the seats. And we got beat pretty damn bad. And I think you probably saw how hard people like Al Remmer worked their campaign. He was one of the few people actually endorsed by the governor. He set a record for fundraising, so money was no object for Al Remmer. And he, Al, you know, I got to know Al pretty well.
And he still got beaten by Johnny O.
And he got beat by Johnny O, who's another person. I have a lot of respect for Johnny O. The Al Remmer campaign was about as organized and well-funded as any campaign could be. So there were delegates that, and I don't know if this is the exact figure, I heard that the average Republican delegate was given approximately $40,000 for the campaign. I didn't receive any money, and that's okay, I didn't expect any. They tried to throw it into the district where they thought they had a chance of winning. So as good as a campaign that Al Remmer ran, and you were familiar with it.
Yes, we were actually at one of his fundraisers.
Right. So, I mean, actually, we were there together. I think.
Yes, we were.
We sat at the same table.
Yes, in Annapolis. I'm not Annapolis, Arbutus.
Yeah. So,
Arbutus.
I mean, there's a campaign that was run as good as you can. I mean, Al Remmer's a very smart guy and worked extremely hard. Money was not an object, and yet he was defeated. So.
And again, from that, I think you're saying you're going back to the numbers again.
Well, some of the precincts, the Republicans were outnumbered 5-1. So that's kind of like sword fight with Zorro.
That is tough. Right, exactly.
I knew that going into it. But, you know, I always try to keep a positive attitude. And like I said, a Hail Mary pass works once in a while. But I did gain a lot of experience, and I would do it again, Paul. I mean,
I mean, we've talked to other candidates and people, I mean, too. And it's a matter of, again, it's this whole idea of the voters thinking of the two-party system, and they've said it, other people here, that they don't even look so much at the candidate. It's just, if I'm supposed to vote blue, I vote blue. If I'm supposed to vote red, I vote red. And they don't see the person at all. And you've just said earlier, like, really you should look at the individual. There shouldn't be such a strong dividing line between Republican and Democrat.
You know, if a Republican was going to win in that district, and even going into it, I didn't really know. I mean, the stars were all lined up for Republican. You had Governor Hogan's popularity. You had a Republican county executive in the Howard County part of the district. We had a strong executive candidate in Al Remmer.
Anne Arundel County, Steve Shue.
Anne Arundel County with a, I mean, so.
They were Republican incumbents that both lost.
Yeah, and Alan Kittleman, I mean, that shocked me. I mean, I was actually at his function at over in Howard County election night. I stood in the rain next to his daughter at Howard High School the morning of the election next to Haley, and when I woke up the next morning after the election, I mean, when we left the event in Howard County for Kittleman, I mean, it was pretty much, there was no catching up for me. But when I woke up the next morning, there was two emotions that ran through my head. One was sadness that I didn't win. The other was a relief, because, I mean, I was getting up at 6 o'clock every day, headed over to Columbia, you know, and Governor Ehrlich was right. It was a marathon. I was, you know.
Beat, I'm sure. Yeah. And that's part of what I'm asking here, to maybe you've addressed it somehow, is, you know, from that campaign, what did you learn?
That the numbers are the numbers, and I don't care how much money you have. I don't care how many hands you shake. It's an uphill battle in that particular area.
Right.
Now, the people I ran against, for me personally, it was a very clean race. It was, I mean.
There was no mudslinging, right?
No, not with me. As far as
not by you, but I don't know. I didn't hear the Democrats really do it either.
I mean, I can't speak for other people that were in the race, but between me and my opponents,
yeah, it was a quiet campaign.
I mean, it was raining. It was dark. It was Rockburn Elementary School, the eve of election, and I see Terry Hill there, and I go, Terry, she couldn't reach. I said, Terry, let me reach that for you. She said, Bob, you're losing your voice. Promise me when you get home, you're going to gargle. I mean, that was the kind of race.
Nice.
You know, Eric Ebersol, I mean, he tells my wife, he goes, your husband's going to have, his office is going to be next to mine. Unfortunately, Eric was a little bit wrong, but
still, that's very nice of him.
Yeah, it's good people.
So, and you did learn things from that. Well, the question would be for a lot of people, too. You lost, and were you so down that would you run again?
Well,
for anything.
Well, I would run for something. Maybe dog catcher my precinct. I did actually deliver my. I did actually win my precinct in that, you know, Relay Arbutus area.
Well, and you're well liked locally.
Oh yeah. So if there's ever a dog catcher position, I'll probably be the first one to file. But you know, also. I have to look at the numbers again. I think I did. You know, you're supposed to be a team.
Right.
I think I delivered. I think I delivered Al Redmer his best numbers in my district.
Oh, great.
How'd
you do here in Lansdowne?
Good.
You did.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
I'll have to look at the map again. I think Lansdowne was part of the precinct that I actually beat everybody.
Oh, great. You were number one then.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't just beat, I mean, I beat everybody, even Ebersol.
Interesting.
And that's kind of going into Eric's backyard because that precinct goes up, I think, right where the park and ride is at Rolling Road and 195. So that's a little bit in Eric's backyard. Next time I see him, I'm going to have to rub it in a little bit. Yeah.
Now, you talk about issues that were concerning you, and of course, you know, it's a while to the next election, 4 years for state election. Are there other ways in which you can get your voice heard, other ways that you can get your issues addressed?
Well, I'm going to reach out to some people in the next week or so, whether it's Ben Jealous or Peter Francho or who knows. I made a lot of good friends during this campaign. Some of those people did lose because a lot of people I came in contact were with people like State Delegate Bob Flanagan, Senator Gail Bates, even Alan Kittleman. So if I can help them in any way, whether it's on a volunteer basis or a paid basis, I'd be glad to, you know, put my 2 cents in. It ain't over until it's over.
Would you do any lobbying?
Not really.
Not official lobbying?
No, I think 2 of the biggest problems we have in today's current politics is the lobbyists and the unions. Unions started out for good cause, but, you know, when somebody puts the apple on their signs and says that they're endorsed by the teachers, well, they're endorsed by the teachers' union.
Right.
And people need to think for themselves. And it's just too much money influences elections.
Right.
And I don't know the answer, but maybe if you went to a primary and you were picked by your party and you had 10 grand in your bank account, maybe there'd be instead of you donating to me, you would donate it into a pool. I don't know the answer to that really, Jim.
Okay. How about community work? Would
Well,
you do any more community work?
You know, yeah, the answer is yes. I've got 2 turkeys. I'm trying to figure out what to do with them. Whether I'm going to get them down to B. Gaddy's daughter, who I know.
Who runs it now.
That's probably where they're going to go. I used to do deliveries and all for B. Gaddy years ago when she was still alive, because I had a 4-wheel drive vehicle.
Right.
And that's always been a good program. There's some things I like to be involved with. I know Christine Flowers is a homeless advocate in Baltimore City. I've reached out to Christine Flowers. I'd like to see something done with that. There's a lot of things I think we can do that don't cost money. It's just redirecting our resources, like we were talking earlier about. This could be a studio. You wouldn't need to build a $500,000 studio.
Right.
You know, I don't know if we need street sweepers in Baltimore City. They just push it down the drains into the Chesapeake Bay. Maybe those employees could be redirected towards school safety.
Right, right.
Maybe they could help with programs, running after-school sports programs for the kids in the city.
Sure.
But that was one of my main things. Was it amazes me that during at least a 10-month campaign that I was involved in, speaking at 20 forums or so, or neighborhood association meetings, that with Baltimore City being our neighbor, it never came up, our relationship with Baltimore City. Because what's good for Baltimore City or vice versa, I mean, we need to take care of that city. It generates a lot of tax money. I mean, it never came up. So many issues with the schools, the high crime in Baltimore City was never a part. They would ask a lot of stupid questions, Paul. I mean, the forums were not debates. I wish that they were debates.
They were just forums.
They were forums like, what do you think about putting a 2-cent tax on plastic bags? Well, I think plastic bags are horrible. It's the modern day tumbleweed, but, you know, let's make it a different option than one more tax, you know.
And part of what you say is, again, the whole problem with, you know, redistricting. They're talking now, fighting this thing about redrawing District 6 and congressional district. And then they said, well, it might open it up to every congressional district, but it should be within states too, because when you talk about the city, the thing is, you know, right now where we are here where the studio is, we really are we are almost on the border with the city.
I know.
And so, I mean, that's when we've talked about, and some people talk about the micro districts. There ought to be, if there's a 12, there ought to be like a 12 A, B, and C.
Oh, absolutely. Like there's a 9 and 44, there's an A and there's a B.
Yeah, to say that maybe there's a part of 12 that's all Howard County, another part that's all Baltimore County. And they both get maybe 1 or 2 representatives.
I mean, it would have been good, like if I was running to be the state delegate for Arbutus and Halethorpe, then I probably would be the delegate.
Would win.
You know, I said this a couple minutes ago. This country was built by small business people, and all you have to do, and I'm not knocking the Democrats, or I'm saying if you look at our major cities, Baltimore, Detroit, you know, and you see who's been running them. Now, the new term today is someone says they're a progressive. You know, when I went down to lobby against the SAFE Act was just a nice, clean word for sanctuary. So these people are progressives. So if we look at the history of these progressives that have been running our major cities in the last 40 or 50 years, they don't have a good track record. So it's beyond my comprehension why these people keep getting elected to go back and keep doing the same broken things over and over again. I don't get it.
Now, will you continue to do any work with or for the Republican Party?
No, I actually, I felt the love from the Democratic Party. When I was younger, I thought the elephant was kind of cuter than the jackass. But if you're going to get anything done in this area where we live, you need at least to be on a, in my opinion, the Democratic Party was a finely oiled machine, and they know how to run a campaign. And the Republican Party, unfortunately, in my opinion only, and seems like it's run out of gas. And that,
unless your name is Larry Hogan.
Well, you know, that's another topic.
Well, we won't talk about that today. But
yeah, because everybody was going to ride on Hogan's coattails. Were there any coattails to ride on?
No.
No, thank you.
Hogan wins, and almost everybody says endorsed by Larry Hogan did not win.
Correct. And were his coattails even out, or were his coattails tucked in?
Ah.
Did he play both sides of the street? Very shrewd. For instance, why in the world would Larry Hogan support a delay of the Kavanaugh hearings? Just pandering. Well, I don't want. That's another subject. But I actually, I felt the love from the Democratic side, and everybody I know in the State House, they're all Democrats. Well, I guess because most of them are Democrats.
Right.
If I do anything in the future, I have to do it with the support of the Democratic Party. And people might say, "Well, Bob, you switched parties." Well, yeah, I did switch parties.
Now, are you still in business? Are you retired?
No, I just do a little bit of work once in a while in a consulting, like that gas station called me that's having a problem with, an inspection. I'm working on helping somebody build an addition to the grocery store over in Cherry Hill.
You said you were, I thought, on the board of the Irish Museum?
Yeah, that's a fun thing. And,
so you do that too. That's community work.
That's community work, yeah.
So you're keeping your hand in it.
Yeah, being here is what you guys do here is a community service. So as far as I'm concerned, being here, this is anything that I can put out here. If somebody learns one thing, this is community service. What you guys do, and you guys do it for free, and I think that's what community service is.
Volunteering.
Yep.
Want to ask you the last real important question is, okay, what's the future for Bob Cocky?
Well, I mean, honestly, I need to take at least a month. I was so exhausted after and certain things at my house got, not out of whack, but, just, trimming the bushes and cleaning all the crap, I mean, I've got to get my house back in order.
Right.
And I want to get a good physical to make sure that I'm in good health. I feel good.
Yeah, good.
And I got to spoil my wife a little bit because she took a hit for 10 months, not having me home all the time. And so.
Sure. I hope you gave her a good birthday.
Well, yeah, we did. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I didn't. Her son did. But so I'm going to take until the first of the year to regroup.
Okay.
And make some calls and try to get some input from people that I respect and see if there's anything I can do to help them or if there's anything they can do to help me. But I'm not going to just sit back and retire. I mean, it's just, I would be bored silly, Paul.
Okay.
I'll come over here and bug you guys.
Okay, sure. We'll love to have you. Now, do you have anything else you want to sum up, a final word?
You miss every shot you don't take.
That's good words to live by.
I mean,
I say it in a different way. I say, if you don't ask, you don't get.
Right. I would like to get involved more with Baltimore City.
Oh, okay.
Because who's more important, in your opinion, Paul? Is the governor more important or the mayor of Baltimore City? Where's the tax dollars get? With two major teams, a great port, all the things.
Baltimore City.
I mean, that's the hub,
Yeah.
and it needs to be a shining jewel.
Right.
And
True.
And if that government down there, using a sports analogy again, if you lost that many games, you wouldn't still be the coach. So it might be time for a new coach.
Well, we'll see in a couple of years.
I'll leave you with that.
All right. And thanks again for stopping in, Bob.
Thanks, Paul. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
It's always a pleasure.
And there we are, ladies and gentlemen, again tonight, an end of another Maryland Politics. I'm Paul Stefan, and we'll see you next time.
You're watching Maryland Politics here on TV Free Baltimore.
Once upon a time, I was a liberal. Well, to be honest, less than a year ago, I was still a liberal. I became a liberal because I felt I'd found a tribe whose values aligned with my own. I staunchly reject racism of any kind. I reject the marginalization of any human being based off of their gender or sexual orientation. I reject tyrannical groupthink. I reject a system which allows an ambitious, misinformed, and dogmatic mob to suppress free speech, create false narratives, and apathetically steamroll over the truth. I reject the acceptance of junk science and superstition to advance ideological agendas. I reject hate. These are the reasons why I became a liberal. And these are the same reasons why I am now walking away. For years now, I have watched as the left has devolved into intolerant, inflexible, illogical, hateful, misguided, ill-informed, un-American, hypocritical, menacing, callous, ignorant, narrow-minded, and at times, blatantly fascistic behavior and rhetoric. Liberalism has been co-opted and absorbed by the very characteristics it claims to fight against. For years now, I've watched as people on the left have become anesthetized to their own prejudices and bigotry, and the prejudices and bigotry of those around them who echo their values. I have watched as formerly sensible people who claim to reject racism have come to embrace the principles of universally hating and blaming all of society's problems on all people who have white skin. I have witnessed the irony of advocacy for gender equality morph into blatant hatred and intolerance of men and masculinity. I have seen the once earnest fight for equality for the LGBT community mutate into an illogical demonization of heteronormativity and the push to vilify and attack our conventional concepts of gender. These same self-proclaimed victims of intolerance now turning on the gay community that they attached themselves to advance their agenda, now calling gay people privileged and themselves victims of injustice. I have watched as the left has allowed themselves to become hypnotized by false narratives and conclusions perpetuated by social justice warriors who misrepresent and misconstrue facts, evidence, and events to confirm their own biases that everyone who does not comply with their prejudicial conclusions and follow their orders is a racist, a bigot, a Nazi, a white supremacist, homophobic, Islamophobic, xenophobic, misogynistic, and alt-right extremist. And I have watched as they have used these heartless and carelessly assigned labels to intimidate, threaten, bully, silence, attack, unemploy, blacklist, and destroy anybody who dares to fight back. They'll come for me, and then they'll come for you. And worst of all, the Democratic Party and the liberal media has embraced, affirmed, aided, and abetted this cult ideology. In an effort to gain voters and maintain power, the Democratic Party that I once loved has joined forces with the extremist left. The Democratic Party and the liberal media now believe their own ill-gotten conclusions and have ominously decided that they, and only they, know the remedy for society's ills. The left has decided that the solution to problems with race relations in America is more racism. The left believes that attacking, insulting, and dehumanizing one group of people elevates another. The left now believes that there are no boundaries when telling lies, omitting the truth, or misrepresenting facts when telling the news, because their end justifies their means. The left has now decided that its point of view is the only acceptable one, and that suppressing, censoring, and banning open dialogue and debate is virtuous and progressive. The Democratic Party has adopted a deleterious belief system, happily and without skepticism, separating people into groups based off of identity and then organizing them into camps of victims and oppressors. If you are a person of color, an LGBT person, a woman, or an American immigrant, the Democratic Party wants you to know that you are a victim and destined to stay that way. They will insist that you are a victim doomed to exist within a system that is rigged against you, that you are a victim of systemic oppression, that you are a victim of your circumstances, and that no amount of hard work or motivational action will ever allow you to overcome your victimhood or the privilege of those around you. This is perhaps the Democratic Party's greatest and most insidious lie. But if you are a minority in America today, the left-wing politicians and the liberal media don't want you to ever discover this lie. So they bombard us with stories designed to reinforce the narrative that you are in danger, that you cannot succeed. They manipulate your fears and concerns by telling you that you are disadvantaged, disempowered, and disposable to everyone, accept them. They will tell you that you need them. They will tell you that you are only safe under their supervision. They will promise to liberate you from all that chains you. And then they will do absolutely nothing for you. Once upon a time, I was a liberal. But liberalism has changed, and I will no longer be a part of an ideology or political party that represents everything that contradicts my values of unity, equal opportunity, personal empowerment, compassion, and love. So I am walking away. And I encourage all of you to do the same. Walk away.
This is my jump shot.
Trash ball, a neat game. Everybody wins. Let me show you how to play. Well, when you pick up some trash, pretend it's a ball, and then you throw it in the bucket, you're playing a trash ball. A jump shot hook, you gotta put it away. We're gonna play that trash ball every day.
Come on, Baltimore, play ball and keep it clean.
As you may be aware, around 1:30 in the morning on September 14th, we had a disturbance at the avenue at White Marsh, where we had a number of fights breaking out after the local businesses and restaurants were closing. During that time, we had one victim who went to a hospital believing that he had been shot, but while he was being treated, it was discovered it was actually a stab wound. He, along with a number of other people, said that they thought they heard shots fired during these altercations at the avenue.
Knock him out!
Oh, he got a gun? You think he got a gun?
He's got a gun. He's got a gun.
We've been able to isolate pictures of our shooter in some of the surveillance video. We believe that the suspect who did the shooting was a black male suspect, very thin, about 20 to 30 years old. In most of the video, he can be seen wearing a white tank top and grayish-looking skinny jeans. We are asking anyone who recognizes this individual or who was on the avenue with this individual that night, call Baltimore County Police Department and help us identify him. Another person we're interested in identifying is another black male subject. He's about 25 to 35 years old, a little bit more heavyset than our shooter, and he can also be seen in some of the same frames as our shooter. He's also wearing a white tank top and blue jean shorts. We would like to identify this person so that we can also question him in reference to this shooting. A third person that we're interested in identifying is another black male. He is wearing a red t-shirt with writing on it, and he appears to be wearing white pants. It appears he may have a goatee or a scruffy type beard and short black hair. He is also wanted for questioning only in connection with this shooting.
He's got a gun. He's got a gun. Hey! Stop! Stop jumping at me! That's a move. That's a move.
He got a gun.
Who's got a gun? Who's got a gun?
Nobody got a gun.
The blue guy has a gun. Hey! Hey! Let's know. Ain't worth it. Ain't worth it. Ain't worth it. Ain't worth it with the gun. Hey! Let him in! Go in the car. Go in the car. Go in the car. Go in the car.
Baltimore County Police Department is asking anyone who can help us identify any of these three subjects that were there that night on the avenue when this shooting occurred to call us at 410-307-2020.
The next show will start in 1 minute.
Tyrone Keys here with The Wealth Hustle. We've got a great episode coming up for you. It's about how to thrive through the next recession. Yes, a recession is coming for sure. When? I don't know. But you need to know these 5 tips in order to thrive through the next recession. Tune in to TV Free Baltimore and The Wealth Hustle for The Wealth Hustle Live, how to thrive the next recession. Attention on deck and welcome to the Wealth Hustle Live here in the TV Free Baltimore studios. I am your host, Tyrone Keys, and I thank you for joining. This is going to be a very interesting and important educational episode. I want you to sit back, grab a friend, grab a family member, and I want you to pay close attention to what we're going to talk about. Question I have for you is, are you in a recession right now? Now, I'm not talking about the country. I'm talking about you. Are you in a recession? Do you even know how you would tell whether or not you're in a recession? Well, that's what we're going to go through today. But first, I want to encourage you to go on and hit subscribe to TV Free Baltimore. This is a great channel. I'm very grateful for what they've been able to do with us here at The Wealth Hustle, partnering with us to bring you this programming. And I also want you to subscribe to The Wealth Hustle. You're going to get a lot out of both. So let's get started. A recession. Now, when a recession is defined or talked about usually, we're talking about it on the scale of a country, a national economy. When you hear it in the news, you might hear that term thrown around. So you might ask yourself, what is a recession? Well, technically defined, a recession is 2 or more quarters, so 2 3-month periods throughout the year, at least, that show negative GDP or gross domestic product growth, okay? So what is gross domestic product? Gross domestic product is simply a measure of all of the goods and services added up. How much did they sell in the previous quarter? Now, that's a measure that's given to us. You know, we look at it on a quarterly basis usually, and we also can look at it on a monthly basis. The big number is the annual number. What was the GDP like in the previous year? If we had 2 quarters of negative growth in GDP, then we count that as a recession. That's on a national level. You can look at it the same for you as an individual. Let me give you an example. Suppose you've got a lot of credit card debt. And suppose it's up somewhere in the 15 to 16% range. You're making monthly payments. So that debt is stacking up higher and higher. You may, in fact, have your own personal negative gross domestic product. Doesn't matter how much money you're making, if you're spending more, especially in bad debt, then you could be experiencing a bunch of negative quarters of growth. So how do you solve that? Well, the answer is easy, although, actually accomplishing the solution might be difficult. You just got to pay your bills off and you got to manage debt better. Now, we talked about debt on this channel before. We talk about it a lot because there is good debt and there is bad debt. If you use your credit card to go and buy an impulse item, say a nice new leather jacket, you use that credit card, you go buy that jacket, say it costs you $100. And say you say, well, I'm not going to pay that $100 off in the next 30 days. I'm going to let that interest accrue and I'm just going to pay the minimum payment. Well, you wind up paying more for that jacket than it originally cost. So unless you pay that debt off within 30 days, as we have talked about before, you wind up paying more. And you wind up putting yourself potentially into your own personal recession. Okay, let's talk about recessions in a little bit of a larger view. Now, back in 2007, a recession started. Lots of people call it the Great Recession. This recession started in technically December of 2007. And it lasted through 2009. Now, a lot of people would say, wait a minute, that recession lasted a lot longer than through 2009 because they continued to feel the effects of it. It was caused by the housing crisis. You know, a lot of people lost their homes through foreclosure because of toxic loans and that sort of thing during that time. And so it took people a longer time than through 2009 to recover because they were still experiencing their personal recessions. Although the economy, the GDP, had kicked back into positive territory, the effects were still felt by individuals. What I want you to do, a little bit of a homework assignment. I want you to go and watch a movie called The Big Short. Very entertaining. It's got a lot of big name talent in that movie. And it will explain to you in an entertaining way exactly how we got into that recession. And it'll break down what happened in the housing crisis and show you how that led to America really coming close to the brink of, just financial ruin, really. Okay? So that's a homework assignment. Go watch The Big Short. Now, what I want to do when we come back is I want to talk to you about 5 ways that you can thrive through a recession. Okay? Not just survive through it, but thrive through it. And these 5 ways, coincidentally, will also help you avoid your own personal recession. So again, this is Tyrone Keys. This is The Wealth Hustle Live on TV Free Baltimore. We'll be right back.
Hi. Hi. I'm Dawn Wells, and guess what? You are watching TV Free Baltimore.
Okay, we're back, and we're talking about how to thrive through a recession. Now, why are we talking about a recession? Okay, because one is coming. How do I know that one is coming? Because the economy is cyclical. That means it goes through cycles of ups and downs, and it has to do that. Because if it didn't do that, then there would be no real way for us to have genuine economic growth. Think about it like this. During a recession, it gives people an opportunity to pick up assets for less and to also build wealth. If the markets just kept going up at a steady clip and never took a breather, then it would be very difficult for people to get in and purchase assets at any time. So the markets are cyclical. They blow off steam sometime. And when that happens, it provides you and I with an opportunity to actually pick up assets on the cheap. This happened in 2007 through 2010 in the real estate market. When you saw, prior to that recession in 2007, you saw a lot of just outrageously priced real estate, okay? It was just, it was just incredible, unsustainable. Then, when that market crashed, it created an opportunity for a lot of real estate to be picked up at fire sale prices. So we're talking about a recession because at some point we are going to experience one again. We've been through 9 years of a bull market. And what that means is markets have been rising steadily through the past 9 years. And that can't be sustained forever. So we know that at some point we've got to expect a recession. So that's why we're here tonight. That's why we're getting prepared for it. Now, what are some of the things that you can do to thrive through this recession that is going to eventually come upon us? Number one, I want you to examine your risk tolerance. Now, what is risk tolerance? I'll give you an example. A 25-year-old has a different risk tolerance than a 55-year-old who's nearing retirement. That 55-year-old, sure, he or she has a lot of assets that they've accumulated over the previous decades, but they cannot afford to be as risky with those assets. They have to be risk averse because they don't have as much time to build those assets back up in the event that they take a crash or are devalued in some way. So when you think about risk aversion, think about how you need to plan the assets that you have, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and real estate, and how risky you can really afford to be, all right? So when I talk about allocations and risk, that's what we mean. That 25-year-old, he or she, they have a lot more time in front of them, so naturally they can be less risk averse. In fact, if they want to use their time to the fullest possible potential, then they will be less risk averse. How does that look? That looks like maybe they are buying properties to fix them up and then sell them for a premium. Maybe they're investing in smaller companies, stock-wise, things like that. Things that are have a much higher likelihood of a higher return. They're not looking so much for income as the 55-year-old is. So that's the first thing. Number two is be aware of your surroundings. What do I mean by that? Being aware of your surroundings is, again, we're going back and realizing that we've been in a bull market for 9 years. We know that the music cannot play forever. At some point, the band has to pack up and leave the dance floor. We do not want to be the people who are left standing when this happens. So be aware of your surroundings. Review your assets regularly. Don't just think, hey, it's been going gangbusters for the past 5 years, I'll let it ride. This casino that you're in right now is the most important that you'll ever be in, and that's because your assets are riding on this wheel. So be aware of your surroundings. Understand what is going on in the economy. Now, if we've been in one of the longest bull markets in history, we know that at some point the party's over. So situational awareness as to all of your accounts, as to your real estate holdings, as to the situation at your job and in your business. If you own a business, you must be aware and plan in the event that we do have a recession. And as far as I'm looking at it, I look at it in terms of the last recession that we had, a very deep one, okay? That way, if you're prepared for something that's severe and that doesn't happen, then you're still in good stead. Number three, cash is king. Now, we've talked about this fact on the show a lot, that when you're talking about winning in finance, you've got to at least be able to beat inflation. Inflation grows at about 3% annually. So I always use this analogy. If you got a 2% raise last year, you actually got poorer because you're lagging behind by 1 percentage point. Inflation means that things became more expensive. And if you just got 2% in your raise, you didn't quite keep up. Now, we talked about the value of having an emergency account, an account that has cash in it so that if you run into a hot water heater problem, 4 tires need to be replaced, something like that, you can dip into there and you can get that money without disturbing the money that's working for you. Okay, that's the type of money that you hold in a savings account. But when we talk about cash being king, you need to, at some point, take some of your winnings off of the table. And when you do that, maybe you look at the dividend growth that you've had over the past 5 years, and you take that off of the table. Well, where do you put it? Well, you can put it in something like a CD, money market account. Now, it's not going to grow gangbusters, but it is going to be safe. In a recession, you want some liquidity to be safe. However, you do not want to liquidate your entire portfolio. And the reason for that is because the stock market, the real estate market, the markets will go back up again. Again, it's all cyclical. So you don't want to come totally out of the market, but it's okay to take some of the winnings off of the table. You're in it to make money. And if you've made money, then go ahead and shelter some of it and let the rest continue to work for you. Point number 4 on how to thrive during a recession, national or personal or both. Double down on your business and your career. What you want to do is you want to make sure that you are seen as a viable expert in whatever it is you do. So maybe that's plumbing, maybe that's electricity, maybe you're an attorney, maybe you're a nurse that works for a hospital. Whatever it is you do, you want to make clear that your value is just unquestionable. The value you bring to the company or the value you bring to your client is unquestionable. That way, when a recession eventually happens again and people, they retract on their disposable income and they start to spend a little more judiciously, they will still see you as someone who's going to give them the most value for that hard-earned buck. Now, they're looking at that money now in a recession much more closely than they were before the recession, in the good times when things were disposable. So you want to, and especially if you're working at a company, if you don't own your own business, you want to be able to demonstrate value to your employer because let's face it, when we go through recessions, companies tend to lay off. It's a way that they can save on money simply because they're not getting the revenues that they had because customers aren't spending as much. So if you're a valuable member of that team, the likelihood of you being shown the door may be a lot less than someone who does not look at it that way. The same is true if you own a business. You have to always demonstrate value. And if you do the things now that are necessary to prove that you're that expert, then people will continue to deal with you and send you business in a recession. I want to share a quote with you for our 5th tip on how to thrive through a recession, personal or national. This quote, you're not going to believe who this quote is from. The riskiest thing you can do is get greedy. Lance Armstrong said that. Now, I hope you're familiar with Lance Armstrong. If you're not, quick synopsis. The man had stage 4 cancer. He defeated cancer, came back, competed in all of these Tour de France races. And the man who just suggested you not get greedy, got greedy. And it ended very badly for Lance Armstrong. He ended up being stripped of all his titles because he was doing steroids and just a mess. But Lance was right. Don't be greedy. So when we see all of this, money that we've accumulated on properties, on stocks, on bonds, on all of the things that we've ridden through the good times on, don't be greedy. Don't be afraid to take some of the winnings off of the table. Again, by doing so, you will be able to shelter some of that money. And then look, this is the game. Money's supposed to work for you. But at the same time, you're not supposed to approach this situation as if you are at the One-Armed Bandit over in Vegas or down in, I guess, Annapolis, Maryland now, Anne Arundel County. Don't get greedy. Look at your portfolio of all of your assets dispassionately. Don't attach emotion to it. Look at it for what it is supposed to do. I know we have a tendency, and I've been guilty of this myself. You look at an item and you attach an emotional component to it. I've done that with cars, okay? I've done that with the first property that we ever rehabbed. Now, lucky for me, it worked out, but I had an emotional attachment to it. That's dangerous. When you get an emotional attachment and you get kind of greedy, it has a tendency to end up very bad for you. So this game of money that we all have to play, okay? It costs to exist in this world. We have to realize that there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. Take some of those winnings off the table, shelter them, and stay in the game, okay? Nothing wrong with that. So those are our 5 tips for how to thrive through a recession. And also remember, this country right now is not in a recession. But I think I said it before, the CNBC recently reported that 30% of people are still paying off debt, Christmas debt from last year, 2017. So a lot of those people are probably in a recession themselves, personally. So you don't want to wait to get out of your personal recession. If you're in your personal recession and then we get a national recession, then you're really behind the 8 ball. And as a wealth hustler, I know that that's not where you want to be. So thank you for tuning in. I want to remind you to go on and subscribe to TV Free Baltimore, subscribe to The Wealth Hustle. These are your homework assignments. Subscribe to TV Free Baltimore, subscribe to The Wealth Hustle. That will take you all of 10 seconds to do. Watch The Big Short. Okay, really watch that and understand how we got into that last recession. And replay this video. Talk about this to your friends. Let them know how to thrive through a recession. As always, I thank you for watching. I want you to play to prosper, and we'll see you next time.
This is Hugh. This is my son. He started on drugs when he was 16. When his life became confused, unreal, filled with horrifying hallucinations, he ended his life. Get between your kids and drugs any way you can if you want to save the kid's life.
Hello, I'm Steve Arnold, the publisher of Nostalgia Digest, and you're watching TV Free Baltimore. Well done.
The Despotille is on my shore, Maryland, my Maryland. His torch is at thy temple door, Maryland, my Maryland. Avenge the patriotic gore that fleck the streets of Baltimore, and be the battle queen of yore, Maryland, my Maryland. Thou wilt not cower in the dust, Maryland, my Maryland. Thy beaming sword shall never rust, Maryland, my Maryland. Remember Carroll's sacred trust, remember Howard's warlike thrust, and always onward with the just, Maryland, my Maryland.
This concludes another day of live stream broadcasting from TV Free Baltimore.